more so after COVID-19 induced disruptions. My country knows that more work needs to be done globally to close the gender gaps that are often aggravated in times of crisis. Opportunities are being created for all Zimbabweans, especially for women and the youth, to realize their individual and their collective potential. Milestones have thus been achieved in the implementation of SDG 5 on gender equality, leading to expanded empowerment and employment opportunities for both women and the youth. The proportional representation for women in parliament is enshrined in the Constitution. Under my leadership, Zimbabwe has legislated reserved youth seats in the National Assembly. To further strengthen, my government has introduced a 30% quota for women in local authorities. This is more important as women bear the brunt of poor service delivery at the local level. The youth focal districts within government ministries has helped to mainstream the issues of young people, particularly young women. Mr. President, sustainable socio-economic development is an indispensable imperative for the enjoyment of the fundamental rights of any people. The policy of devolution and decentralization has seen increased budgetary support directly to the local authorities. Communities right at the village, ward, and district levels are now making independent decisions and prioritizing their programs and projects informed by the most pressing needs at their level. This has seen the rapid construction of schools, clinics, water and sanitation infrastructure, and other social amenities in the most remote areas of Zimbabwe. In the same vein, my government is promoting heritage-based rural industrialization to guarantee improved livelihoods and incomes of all communities based on their respective unique natural resources endowments. Mr. President, Zimbabwe is modernizing, industrializing based on our local resources and the human capital base. Inspired by the historic monument, the Great Zimbabwe, from which our country's name is derived, by brick, stone upon stone, with the support of our friends and partners. As my government continues to entrench democracy, good governance, and the rule of law, we are committed to vibrant, competitive, and peaceful political contestations. Notwithstanding our success, the ongoing deleterious effects of the illegal sanctions continue to hamper and slow down our progress and inclusive development. Zimbabwe is a peace-loving country. We remain indebted to the SADC region and the African Union, as well as other progressive members in the Committee of Nations, for their unwavering support and calls for the removal of these unwarranted and unjustified sanctions on Zimbabwe. We once again call for their immediate and findings of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the negative impact of the unilateral coercive measures on the enjoyment of human rights who visited Zimbabwe in 2021. Mr. President, as international engagement and re-engagement policy, the policy is underpinned by the principles of mutual understanding and respect. cooperation, partnership, and shared values with other members of the international community. We desire to be a friend to all and an enemy to none. My country is greatly concerned that more than 20 years after the Durban Declaration and the Program of Action, hate crime and intolerance have continued to increase at an alarming rate, including at international level. There is need, therefore, to recommit to fighting these scourges in all their forms and manifestations. The spread of terrorism and intensification of all the conflicts on the African continent and throughout the world have been a setback to our quest to silence. We remain seized with insecurity and a terrorist insurgency in northern parts of Cabo Delgado in Mozambique and the conflicts in parts of the Great Lakes region. Emboldened by our SADC regional philosophy that an injury to one is an injury to all, we continue to pool our resources to fight terrorism and other threats to peace, security, and stability in our region. We appeal support to our efforts to restore peace in the affected areas. Zimbabwe stands committed to playing its part for the realization of peace and security within various United Nations, African Union, and SADC peacekeeping and peace-building missions. This scale cannot be addressed through old structures and the old ways of doing business. Zimbabwe subscribes to the Ezulwini Consensus as the sustainable approach to the reform of the United Nations Security Council. Mr. President, in conclusion, Zimbabwe reaffirms its commitment to the principles of the United Charter and the multilateralism in the resolution of the complex and intersecting challenges facing our world. The implementation of the inclusive 2030 agenda remains our biggest hope for the future we all want. There is indeed a more compelling case for enhanced solidarity, cooperation, and partnerships if we are to respond effectively to these challenges and ensure the United Nations should remain the beacon and a source of hope for the global citizenry. As leaders, we have a weighty burden and responsibility to make the United Nations deliver to the expectations of all the peoples of this world. I thank you for your kind attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the request protocol to escort His Excellency. Now the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Umaro Sissoco Embalo, President of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. A request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Umaro Sissoco Embalo, President of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Senhor Presidente,
Mr. President,
Senhores Chefes de Estado
Honorable
e de
Heads
Governo,
of State and Gentlemen,
permitam-me expressar
I would
as
like to
minhas
warmly
calorosas felicitações
congratulate
ao Senhor Kasaba
Mr.
Rossi
Kasaba
da
Korossi
Hungria
from Hungary
pela sua eleição na
for
qualidade de
his election
Presidente
as the President
da
of the
77ª
77th
das
Nations
Nações
General
Unidas.
Assembly.
Gostaria também de saudar o empenho
I would
do
also like to
secretário-geral António
congratulate
Guterres
the Secretary
em prol da
General,
paz
Antonio
do
Guterres,
mundo e com
for his
particular
commitment to world
o
peace,
Sr. Abdullah
and
Shaheed
Mr. Abdullah
das
Sahid
Maldivas
from the
pelos
Maldives
resultados alcançados
for the results that he
durante o seu
achieved
mandato.
during his term.
Senhor Presidente,
Mr. President,
muito já foi dito,
much
pelos
has been
eminentes,
said on this
que permite
podium,
evitar certas repetições
which allows me to avoid
e é
certain
chegada a hora
repetition.
de pensarmos
The
numa
time has
solução
come
global
for us to think
e duradoura,
of a global and
através da
lasting
solidariedade,
solution
sustentabilidade
based on
e
solidarity,
ciência como
sustainability,
tema dessa
science,
sessão,
as the themes
convida
of this
a fazer.
session calls us to do.
pois a solução de muitos dos
Because the
nossos
solution
problemas
to
global,
global solidarity
condução de
and
ações
the pursuit
concertadas
of concerted and
coletivas.
collective actions.
A pandemia de Covid-19 nos
The
relembrou
COVID-19
tragicamente
pandemic tragically reminded
vivemos
us
no mundo
that we live
globalizado
in a globalized
que a
world,
vida de todos os
that the
seres
lives
humanos
of all human
tem igual
beings
valor
have equal
e que a
value,
humanidade
that humanity is
é
one,
tem destino.
and that we have
comum.
a common destiny.
Devemos partilhar conhecimentos
We must share
científicos e
scientific knowledge
garantir
and
o
ensure
acesso equidade. Nos
Mr.
últimos
President,
2 anos, conseguimos criar
during the last 2 years,
maior
we were able to
estabilidade
create
política
greater
no nosso
political
país,
stability in our country,
reafirmar o nosso papel,
reaffirm our
continente
role in the
africano,
African continent,
retomar o nosso
and
lugar
reclaim
no
our
concerto
place
das
in the
nações.
concert of nations.
Contudo, o contexto internacional
However, the
não
international
favorece
context
o
does not
cabal
favor
desempenho
the
do nosso
full
plano de
implementation
desenvolvimento,
of our development plan
sobretudo dos objetivos
to the
do
achievement of
desenvolvimento
the
sustentável.
Sustainable Development Goals.
Nós, em África, estamos também
Africa,
a sentir
We're
as
also feeling
consequências da guerra da
the
Ucrânia, grande impacto,
whose impact
em
is
particular, no
unfortunately
setor da energia
broad,
e da agricultura.
particularly
A
in the
inflação
energy and
e aumento
agricultural
dos
sectors.
preços dos cereais e dos outros
Inflation and
produtos
increased
alimentares
prices of grains and other
básicos
staples
agravou
have considerably
consideravelmente
worsened a
uma
food
situação
situation that was
alimentar
already
já
challenging.
bastante difícil. A Guiné-Bissau é um país costeiro.
Guinea-Bissau is a
Uma
coastal
grande
country
parte
with a great
insular.
number of islands.
Temos feito muitos
We have dedicated
esforços
much
no
effort
que
to
concerne a
mitigation
mitigação e adaptação.
and the adaptation.
Almejamos que a COP27
And we hope that
seja um
COP27
passo determinante
will be a
de
deciding step
definição e adoção
in
de
defining and
estratégias
adopting
concretas
concrete
para
strategies
minimizar
to
os
minimize
impactos
the
negativos
negative
das
impacts
alterações
of climate
climáticas.
changes.
Senhor Presidente,
Mr. President,
permitam-me, na qualidade de Presidente da
allow me,
Autoridade dos Chefes de
as
Estado
the
do
chairman of the
Governo
authority
da
of the
África Ocidental,
ECOWAS,
a
heads
CEDEAO,
of state and government,
recordar a nossa sub-região
to remind you
enfrenta
that our
grandes desafios
sub-region
em
faces
matéria de
great
segurança
security
e que
challenges
precisamos de paz
and that
para
we need
garantir
peace
o
in
desenvolvimento
order to ensure the
bem-estar
development and
das nossas
well-being
populações,
of our
que
people,
constituem
who
a nossa
are
primeira
our
riqueza.
primary wealth.
A estabilidade de grande parte
The
do nosso
stability
continente em
of a
geral
great part of our
e
continent
África
in
Ocidental
general
em
and of West
particular
Africa in
está
particular
ameaçada pela insegurança
threatened
causada pelo
by
terrorismo
the insecurity caused
extremismo
by terrorism,
violento e a
violent
criminalidade
and extremism,
transnacional,
and transnational
com o
crime,
agravante das violações
which
dos
violates the
princípios do
principles
Estado de
of the
Direito
rule of law
da democracia.
and democracy.
A CEDEAO criou quadro político jurídico
ECOWAS created a
mecanismos
political and
estruturais
legal framework
para a
and
prevenção
structural
e
mechanisms
resolução de
to
crises
prevent and
políticas,
resolve political
institucionais,
and
mas
institutional
contudo,
crises.
os desafios permanecem
However, the
números
challenges
e
continue
difíceis
to be
de
numerous
resolver.
and difficult to overcome.
Precisamos da ajuda internacional
We need
para
international
travar
assistance
o avanço
to
do
stop the
terrorismo
advance
na África
of
Ocidental
terrorism in
e
West
em
Africa
toda a zona do
and
Sahel,
in the
Trata-se
entire Sahel
de
region.
uma ameaça à paz, à
This is
segurança
a threat to
internacionais
international peace and
e para
security.
ser eficazmente
And
combatida,
in order to
deve
combat this
necessariamente
effectively,
envolver
we must
toda a
involve
comunidade
the
internacional
entire
e a
international
ONU
community
em
and
particular.
the UN in particular.
Senhor Presidente,
Mr.
fui
President,
recentemente escolhido para
I was
presidir
recently
a
chosen
Aliança
to
dos
chair
Líderes Africanos
the African Leaders
contra a
of
Malária,
Malaria Alliance,
ALMA.
ALMA.
E de acordo com os dados da OMS,
According to the
96%
WHO
dos
data,
casos globais de malária e
96% of the malaria
98%
cases
das mortes
globally
por malária
and
ocorrem em África.
98% of the malaria deaths
Nosso continente
occur in Africa.
não atingiu de
Our
reduzir
continent has not
reduzir
achieved
a incidência e a
the
mortalidade
establishment
da
of the
malária
goals
em
to reduce
40%
malaria
até
and
2020.
mortality by 40%
Uma etapa
by
fundamental na
2020.
eliminação
And this was a
da malária
fundamental step
no
in
continente
eliminating
africano
malaria in the
até
African continent by
2030.
2030.
Por isso, mais do que nunca,
Therefore,
precisamos de tomar medidas
more than ever,
adequadas
we need to
para
adopt
proteger
appropriate
a todos.
measures to protect
em
all
todos os lugares das
everywhere
doenças
from
infecciosas.
infectious diseases.
Gostaria de aproveitar
I would like
esta
to take this
oportunidade
opportunity to
para
call
convidar
on all
todos os
countries,
países, governos,
governments,
doadores,
donors,
parceiros de desenvolvimento a
and development
contribuírem
partners
para reabastecimento
to
do Fundo
contribute
Global.
to the replenishment
Juntos
of the
e de
global
maneira
fund.
solidária, podemos
Together
acabar
and in
com a
solidarity,
malária
we can
de
end
uma vez
malaria
por
once
todas
and for
e
all
salvar milhões de
and save
vidas
millions
humanas.
of human lives.
Senhor Presidente,
Mr.
falando
President,
da solidariedade entre os Estados e
speaking of
povos,
solidarity among
não podemos
states and
esquecer
peoples,
de mencionar
we cannot forget
Cuba
to mention Cuba
e a necessidade
and the
do
need
embargo
for this
americano
American
contra
embargo
este país
against
irmão
our fellow
ser
nation
imediatamente
to be
levantada.
immediately
Para
lifted.
concluir, quero enfatizar
In conclusion,
que a
I
Guiné-Bissau,
want to emphasize
apesar
that
de ser
Guinea-Bissau,
pequeno
despite being a
país
small
com meios limitados,
country
não
with
poupará os
limited
seus esforços
means,
com
will
vista
not
a
spare any
contribuir
efforts in
para a
order to
manutenção da
contribute to
paz,
maintaining
da
peace,
estabilidade
stability,
e a
and
proteção
security on our planet.
do nosso planeta. Estamos determinados em
We
continuar
are resolute
a
in
participar
continuing to
ativamente
actively
na
participate
consolidação do
in the consolidation
multilateralismo
of
e na
multilateralism
promoção do
and the
diálogo
promotion of
e da
dialogue
cooperação entre os
and
países
cooperation
e
among
povos
the
do mundo.
nations and peoples
obrigado.
of the world. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of Comoros. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of Comoros, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Excellences, Monsieur le Président de l'Assemblée générale,
President of the General Assembly,
Excellences, Monsieur le Secrétaire général,
Secretary General,
Majesté, Altesse, Excellences,
Your
distingués
Majesties,
représentants des
Excellencies,
pays et
distinguished
des institutions
representatives
en
of
vos rangs et qualités, Mesdames et Messieurs,
Member States, ladies and
Assalamu
gentlemen,
alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Je voudrais avant tout propos
above
adresser
all,
mes chaleureuses
I would like
félicitations
to address my warm
à Son Excellence,
congratulations
Monsieur Abdullah
to
Shahid,
His Excellency
pour
Mr. Abdullah
l'efficacité
Shahid
avec
for the
laquelle
efficiency
il a dirigé
with
les
which
travaux
he led the work
de la 66e
of the
session de notre
76th
Assemblée,
session of our
à
General
Son Excellence
Assembly,
Monsieur Jabba Kourouzi,
and His Excellency
qui lui
Mr. Kasaba
succède
Kouroussi,
pour sa
who
brillante
succeeded him.
élection
I
et lui assurer
congratulate you on your outstanding
de la
election, and I
solidarité
can
des
assure you of the
Comores pour
solidarity
réussir
of
à
the
sa mission.
Comores in your task.
J'adresse aussi mes remerciements
I would
à
also
Son
like to
Excellence,
thank
Monsieur Antonio
His
Guterres,
Excellency
Secrétaire général de
Mr.
l'ONU,
Antonio Guterres,
pour son
Secretary General of
investissement
the United
soutenu
Nations, for his
ainsi que
sustained
celui de
commitment
l'ensemble de ses équipes
and all
au
of his
service de la
team
paix
for
et du
their work
développement.
in the service of peace and
Majesté,
development.
Altesse, Excellence, honorable
Majesties,
assistance.
Excellences,
Cette
ladies and
77e
gentlemen,
session de l'Assemblée
this
générale de l'ONU
77th session of the
se
UN
tient
General
à un
Assembly
moment
is being
particulièrement
held
délicat
at a
de
particularly
la vie
delicate time
de la communauté
in the
internationale.
life of the international community.
D'une année à l'autre, la face du monde
From
change
one year to the
profondément.
next, the face of the world
Il y a
has
3 ans, en
changed.
effet, nos
And
pays sont entrés
For 3
dans la
years
plus
now,
lourde
our
crise
countries have been
sanitaire de
facing
leur
the
histoire.
worst pandemic,
Vous l'avez suivi,
as you will know,
a mis à genoux tous les pays du monde
has brought
et
all
démontre
countries of the
que,
world to its
petits ou grands,
knees and
nous
has
sommes
shown
tous
that all
égaux
countries, big
devant
and
le
small,
risque épidémiologique
all face
qui est
these
aujourd'hui l'un des pires
risks
scénarios
from
auxquels
disease.
doit faire face à notre voyage
And
planétaire.
This is really one of the worst
À cet
crises that
égard,
the planet has ever had to
L'Union des
face.
Comores
In
tient,
that
une fois
regard,
encore,
the Union of the
à
Comores
adresser ses
once
remerciements
again
et
would
sa
like to
reconnaissance
address our
à
thanks
toutes celles
to
et à
all
tous ceux qui
of
ont
those
travaillé d'arrache-pied pour
have
fournir
worked
en quelques
so
mois
quickly
des
to
solutions
provide
efficaces
effective solutions
permettant de
within
redonner
months,
espoir au monde
giving hope
et de
again
sortir
to the world
progressivement de cette
that
crise
progressively we
qui a
could
sérieusement ébranlé
come out of this
les
crisis,
économies mondiales.
which has seriously
Et comme si
damaged the
tout
world
cela ne
economy.
suffisait pas,
And as if
une
that
autre
weren't
crise
enough,
causée
another
par l'invasion de
crisis
l'Ukraine
caused by the invasion of
est venue
Ukraine
montrer à nouveau
has shown
et de
once
la façon
again
dramatique
the dramatic
la
way
fragilité du système
in
multilatéral
which the multilateral
qui nous
system
réunit pourtant
is
aujourd'hui.
fragile.
Nous voyons
And yet,
renchérir
this
au
is what
fil
we
des
come
jours
here together to
le prix
discuss
du blé
today.
et des autres
The
produits
price of
alimentaires
wheat and
à des
other
niveaux jamais
foodstuffs
atteints,
have reached
ce qui met en
levels
péril
never
la
seen before,
sécurité
and this
alimentaire
is
en
endangering food
multipliant les risques
security by
de pénurie
increasing
et
the
de
risk
famine.
of shortages and
Et
of
c'est pourquoi
famine. And that is
Mon
why
pays condamne
my country
avec la plus grande
condemns
fermeté
in
cette invasion, un
the
acte de
utmost
notre
manner
temps
this
et exhorte
invasion.
la
And we
communauté
call
internationale
upon the
de
international
convaincre la
community
Russie et l'Ukraine
to
de reprendre dans les meilleurs
convince
délais
Russia and
les
Ukraine
chemins du dialogue et du
to
respect
pursue
mutuel,
the path
seul
of dialogue as
élément
soon as possible.
capable
That is the only
d'ouvrir la
way
voie à
to
la cessation des hostilités.
end
Je
hostilities.
voudrais au reste saluer
And I would also
accords
like
d'Istanbul
to welcome
de
the
juillet
Istanbul Agreement
menés sous les
July,
auspices du président
led
turc,
under the auspices
M.
of
Erdogan,
Mr.
du secrétaire
Erdogan,
général des
President
Nations Unies,
of
M.
Turkey,
Guterres,
and
visant
Mr.
à
Antonio
permettre
Guterres,
l'exportation de millions de
allowing
tonnes de
the
céréales
export of
bloquées.
millions of
dans les
tons
ports
of
ukrainiens.
cereals that were
Ces
blocked in
accords qui
Ukrainian
méritent d'être
ports.
consolidés
Those agreements
preuve
must be
que le
consolidated. They are proof
peut et doit
that dialogue
toujours
can
prévaloir
and should always
pour éviter
take
au monde
precedence
de plonger
in order
dans
to
le chaos
avoid
et la
the world
misère.
falling into chaos and
Honorable
into
assistants.
misery. Ladies and gentlemen,
Outre les préoccupations liées au
apart from the
conflit, aux
concerns
crises
linked to the
sanitaires et
conflict, the
alimentaires
health
actuelles,
crisis, the current
la
food
communauté des
crisis,
nations doit
the
poursuivre
community of nations
sa
must
quête de
continue
solutions idoines
to find
aux
the
problèmes
most appropriate
politiques et
solutions to
territoriaux
the
liés
political and
à la
territorial
souveraineté des États et à la dignité des nations.
claims
C'est dans
of
ce sens
states.
que je
And that
réitère
is why
ici,
I reiterate
au nom
here,
de ma
on
délégation,
behalf of my delegation,
l'impérieuse nécessité
the
de trouver une
imperative
solution
need to
rapide,
find
juste
rapid,
et équitable
just and
à
fair
l'injustice
solutions
flagrante
to
que
the
subit la
flagrant
Palestine.
injustice being suffered
devons
by
trouver en
Palestine.
effet
We have
une
to
solution qui
find
consacre
a solution
le droit du peuple
that will
palestinien
ensure the
à
rights of the
disposer d'un
Palestinian
État
people to
souverain
have a sovereign
avec
state of their
Jérusalem
own,
Est pour
with East
capitale,
Jerusalem as their
vivant
capital,
en harmonie,
living
en parfaite
in
sécurité avec
peace and
l'État
harmony
d'Israël,
with the state
car,
of
comme dit
Israel.
l'adage comorien,
Because,
on choisit les amis, mais on ne choisit pas les voisins.
as they say, you can choose your
S'agissant
friends,
de la
but you
question
can't
du
choose
Sahara
your
marocain,
neighbors.
je tiens à
With regard
réitérer
to
ici
the
la puissante
Moroccan
faille de
Sahara,
l'Union des
I
Comores
repeat the
au
support
principe
of
de la
the
marocanité du
Comores to
Sahara,
the Moroccan
l'initiative
nature of the
marocaine
Sahara,
d'autonomie de cette région dans le
the
cadre
autonomy of this
de la
region
souveraineté
as
du
part
royaume
of the
chérifien
sovereignty
constitue à
of
nos yeux
Morocco.
la meilleure
In
base
our view,
pour
that is the
parvenir
best
à une
basis
solution
to
rapide,
bring about a rapid,
pragmatique et durable
pragmatic and
à ce
lasting
conflit
solution
régional
to this
qui n'a que
regional
trop duré.
conflict which has lasted for far
Ainsi,
too
mon
long.
gouvernement
And
encourage
my government
fortement
also
le dialogue
strongly
entre nos deux
encourages
pays
dialogue
frères
between
que sont le Maroc
brotherly
et
countries
l'Algérie
of Morocco
et
and
salue
Algeria,
toutes les
and we
initiatives
welcome
susceptibles
all
de
initiatives
contribuer
that could
à assurer la paix dans cette
help to
région,
ensure
en
peace
particulier
in this region,
la relance du processus
particularly
politique
the relaunch of the
sur la
political
base
process
des résolutions du
the
Conseil de
basis of
sécurité des
Security
Nations Unies.
Council
Dans le même
resolutions.
chapitre,
And
relative
along
à
the
la
same
souveraineté des
lines,
États,
with regard to the
l'Union des
sovereignty of
Comores
states, the Union of the
renouvelle
Comores
sa position sur la nécessité
repeats our
pour la
position with
République populaire
regard
de Chine
to
de
the
recouvrer
need
son
for the
intégrité
China
sur la
to be
présence
able to
chinoise de Taïwan. Dans ce
recover its
contexte,
sovereignty
compte
over
tenu
the
des
island
menaces
of Taiwan.
qui pèsent
Given the
aujourd'hui sur la
threats
paix,
that we see today
que
hovering
chacun
over peace,
perçoit et appréhende, mon gouvernement invite
my government
toutes les
would
parties
call upon
prenantes
all
aux différents conflits
stakeholders
de
in
faire
various
preuve de
conflicts
retenue et
to
d'esprit de
show
responsabilité.
a sense of responsibility
S'agissant de
and
la situation
restraint
hautement préoccupante du Sahel,
in the
nous savons par
particularly
expérience
difficult area of the
combien il est
Sahel, we know
dangereux
from experience
de laisser
just how
naître
dangerous it
des
can
foyers de
be
tension
to allow
qui
areas of
deviennent
tension
ensuite
to develop.
des terreaux
They
fertiles à
then become
l'expansion
fertile
du
ground for
terrorisme
the
international.
expansion of international
Mon
terrorism.
gouvernement
My
est d'autant plus
government
attentif à cette question que nous avons vu monter en puissance en Afrique australe le
in
phénomène
Eastern
barbare des
Africa
Shabab
has seen
qui constitue une
Al-Shabaab.
menace au
This
sol et en
is
mer
a threat
pour l'ensemble du
to
continent.
the entire
Je
continent.
réaffirme ici,
And
comme
I
je l'ai dit,
reaffirm
comme
here,
je l'ai fait l'année dernière,
as I did last
devant cette
year,
auguste assemblée,
before this
que
August
ces groupes
Assembly,
qui menacent la
that
paix
these
dans le
groups that
monde
threaten
ne
peace
sont pas des
in the
musulmans.
world are not
Ce sont tout
Muslims.
simplement des terroristes
They are simply
qui n'ont rien à voir avec
terrorists
l'islam,
that have nothing to
une
do
religion
with
de paix,
Islam,
de
which is a
tolérance
religion
et
of
de vivre
peace,
ensemble.
tolerance,
Toutefois,
and living together.
Nous sommes conscients
However,
que derrière ces
we
phénomènes
are
terroristes
aware that
contemporains
behind these
que nous devons
current
combattre énergiquement
terrorist movements
se
that we have
cache
to fight,
aussi
we
beaucoup
also
de frustration
have a
au sein
lot
d'une
of
jeunesse sans
frustration
repère et un mal d'avenir.
amongst the young
À cet
people that
égard,
don't see
j'en
a
appelle
future for
aux
themselves.
grandes
And
puissances de
here
ce
I would
monde,
call upon the
en
great powers
rappelant
of
que
this
si
world
leur appui
that
est capital pour contribuer
their support is
au développement économique et
capital
social des
to
États,
contribute to
les
the
plus
social and
menacés,
economic development
celui-ci
of
devrait être
countries.
conçu de façon à répondre aussi aux aspirations des peuples bénéficiaires.
That is very
Je
important
suis
to respond
convaincu
to
que
the
pour
needs of
consolider
the
la paix,
beneficiaries
la
of this
sécurité et
aid.
la stabilité dans le monde,
Peace and security
rien
in
ne
the
vaut la
world
prévention, car
need
c'est le seul
prevention.
moyen de parvenir
Prevention is the only
à
way
régler
that
en
we will
amont,
be able to
par le dialogue et la
address problems
diplomatie,
upstream
les
through
questions complexes
diplomacy.
qui
This
menacent
is how
la
we
paix
can
dans le
address
monde.
the difficult issues
Je
that
ne
are
peux
threatening
parler de
peace in the
conflits
world.
sans évoquer
And of
le
course, if we're
différend
talking about
territorial qui
conflict,
oppose mon pays à la
we have
France,
the
sur
territorial
l'île
dispute
comorienne de
between
Mayotte.
my
Mon
country and
gouvernement,
France with
comme
regard
tous
to
ceux qui l'ont
Mayotte.
précédé, tient
Like
à
previous
rappeler de
governments, we
manière
would
solennelle
recall
devant cette auguste assemblée
before this
et
August
conformément
Assembly
au droit
formally
international,
that in
le
accordance with
caractère comorien
international
de cette
law,
île
this island
soustraite à
is
la souveraineté
Comoran in
comorienne
nature,
lors du
and
processus de décolonisation de notre
the
pays.
sovereignty was removed
La
during the
gestion de ce dossier
decolonization
douloureux
process. This
qui
is a
dure
painful
depuis plus d'une
dossier,
quarantaine
and
d'années
it's gone
voit
on now
fort
for more than
heureusement
40 years.
s'ouvrir des perspectives nouvelles avec l'esprit de dialogue
But we hope
qui s'est
that
créé
dialogue,
entre
we
les parties
welcome the dialogue
comoriennes
that has
et
been
françaises.
created between the French and the
Honorable
Comoran
assistance,
counterparts.
les principes et les valeurs de l'ONU
Ladies and
sont
gentlemen, the
aujourd'hui
principles and the
rassemblés
values of the United
autour
Nations
des objectifs de
are
développement
now
durable
focused on the
dont chaque
sustainable
pays en a
development
fait sa
goals,
priorité.
and each country
Il
has made
convient de
these a
rappeler
priority.
que les
We
changements
would
climatiques
recall that
constituent
climate
un
change
des maillons
is
importants
one
de ces
of
objectifs
the most
de
important
développement
aspects
durable.
of these SDG
Or,
goals.
des régions entières sont appelées
Whole
tout simplement à
regions
disparaître
are going
alors que
to
d'autres
disappear,
sont soumises
and
au
others
quotidien
are
à
on a daily
l'intensification des
basis
phénomènes climatiques
facing
tels
climate
que les
phenomena
inondations,
such as
les
flooding,
sécheresses intenses, les
intense
incidents,
droughts,
les incendies, les régions du littoral
fires,
ou l'acidification des océans.
the loss of
Si cette
coastline and
catastrophe
acidification.
n'épargne aucun
If this,
pays,
this
ni aucune
disaster
région,
spares
il
no
convient de
country
souligner
or region,
que le cas
and
des États insulaires en
small
développement
island
comme les
developing
Comores
states
est
such as the
encore plus
Comores
préoccupant
are
et
in a
mérite
particularly
une
bad
plus
situation,
grande attention
and they need
de
greater
la
attention
part
to
des
be paid
dirigeants que nous sommes.
to them
Et
by
je saisis d'ailleurs
leaders.
cette occasion
And I
pour
take this
renouveler nos
opportunity
condoléances
to once again express
ainsi
our
que notre soutien
condolences
et
and our
notre sympathie
support
aux
and
autorités et au
sympathy to
peuple
the
pakistanais,
people and
à travers
authorities of
elles,
Pakistan,
aux familles endeuillées et sinistrées suite aux fortes
to all those
inondations
families
qui
that
ont
have
affecté
lost
ce pays
family
frère.
members through the
Nos
flooding in that
États, dans
country.
leur ensemble, sont également confrontés à d'autres phénomènes
We're also
dangereux,
facing other
tels que
dangerous
la
phenomena,
piraterie,
such as
la
piracy,
pollution, la
pollution,
pêche illicite, le
illegal
pillage de
fishing,
ressources amères,
the
le trafic
pillaging
humain
of
et le
marine
trafic de drogue,
resources, and
qui
drug
nécessitent
trafficking and
notre
people
plus
trafficking.
haute attention.
They require
Mon
great
gouvernement
attention to be
s'associe
paid.
à toutes les initiatives régionales
And we are
et
part of
mondiales
all
pour
regional
mener
and
un
global
combat sans merci
initiatives in order
contre
to
ces actes barbares
fight these
qui sont
barbaric
un des
acts,
menaces majeures
which are a
pour la
serious threat
sécurité des
for
biens et des
the
personnes. Et
security
c'est pour
of
cette
goods
raison
and people.
que j'ai toujours
And that is
accordé
why I have
une
always
grande importance
attached the
à la
greatest
dimension
importance
sécuritaire
to
dans notre
the
région
security
géostratégique,
of our
notamment dans la zone du
strategic
canal de
area,
Mozambique et de la
particularly in the
région
Mozambique
sud-ouest de
Channel
l'océan
and
Indien.
the southwest of
Honorable
the Indian
assistance,
Ocean.
mon pays,
Ladies
l'Union
and
des
gentlemen,
Comores,
my
vient de
country,
fêter
the Union of the
ses 47
Comores,
années
has just
d'indépendance.
celebrated its 47th
Bien
year
que
of
les 2 premières
independence.
décennies qui ont suivi cette liberté retrouvée ait été émaillé de
The
troubles,
first two
d'agitation
decades
et
saw a lot
d'instabilité
of
politique.
troubles and political
Cela fait plus
instability.
de 20 ans, alhamdulillah, maintenant
For
que le
20
pays
years
a
now,
renoué avec la
thank God,
paix et la
the country
stabilité.
has been able to
Il
find
s'avère alors
again
nécessaire
peace and
de tout
stability.
mettre en œuvre pour
We need to do
consolider
everything to
et
ensure that we
pérenniser
can
cette stabilité politique,
consolidate this
retrouver
political
car elle
stability.
constitue un réel gage de développement
That
socio-économique
is a real
du pays.
yardstick of the
Notre
socio-economic
salut
development
réside
of the
en
country.
effet en une société apaisée,
We need a
soudée
peaceful
et de plus en
society
plus inclusive
that is
de toutes les
cohesive and
structures qui la
inclusive
composent.
of all its
C'est ainsi
components.
que dans la perspective de meilleure
That
cohésion
is why,
nationale,
in order to
et
bring
en
about
mi-mandat,
greater
nous
peace and
avons
social
tenu en
cohesion,
février dernier
in February,
un dialogue
last February,
politique
we held a
national
national political
visant à
dialogue
rassembler davantage
aimed at
les Comoriennes et les Comoriens
bringing together the
autour
citizens of the
d'objectifs essentiels,
Comores
à
around
savoir
essential
la
goals,
paix,
namely
la
peace,
sécurité et
security,
l'unité nationale en vue d'un développement socio-économique
towards
durable. Vous
lasting
comprendrez pourquoi
economic and
je
social
tiens à
development.
remercier
And that's
tous les
why I would like
partenaires
to thank all
qui ont bien voulu
that
apporter leur
have
soutien à ce
provided
dialogue.
their support
Je
to
reste
this
convaincu
dialogue.
que toutes
I
les
am
forces vives de la
convinced
nation
that all
qui ont pris part
political
à ce
forces in
rendez-vous
the country that took part in
important
those important
œuvreront
talks will
dans le sens de la
work
consolidation des
towards
acquis de ces
consolidating
dernières
what's
années
been
en matière
achieved
de droits
over
humains,
the
d'alternance
years
démocratique
and
et ainsi
ensure
avancer
democratic
dans le développement
changes
du
of
pays.
power and
Et s'agissant
development
des droits
in
de
the
l'homme,
country.
permettez-moi
With
de
regard to
souligner
human
que mon
rights now,
pays
allow me to stress
collabore
that my
étroitement
country
avec les
works
instances
closely
régionales
with
et
regional
internationales
and
qui en ont
international
la charge
bodies
et
that
a
are
passé avec
tasked
succès le mécanisme quadriennal de l'examen périodique
with implementing
universel du
the
Conseil des droits de l'homme
quadrennial
en 2019.
review
Les
in
réformes
2019.
essentielles, constitutionnelles et législatives
Essential
menées corroborent en
reforms
effet
have been
la volonté
implemented,
de mon pays de faire
showing the
des droits
willingness
de
of my
l'homme
country to
une priorité
ensure that
nationale.
human rights are a national
Monsieur le
priority.
Président,
Mr. President,
honorable assistance,
ladies and
sur le
gentlemen,
plan social, comme pour ailleurs, la
with regard to the
COVID-19
social
a
situation,
occupé les esprits et obligé les
COVID-19
pays
has
à accorder la
forced
priorité
countries
à
to
sa
give
gestion.
priority
L'Union
to the
des
management of
Comores
the
en a
pandemic.
connu deux vagues,
We had
dont
two
la seconde
waves
s'est
in the
avérée plus
Comores.
virulente,
The second was more
avec de
virulent than
nombreuses
the first,
victimes.
with a number of victims.
Néanmoins, la
Nevertheless,
situation a été maîtrisée
the
dans le
situation
pays
was mastered
grâce
in
aux
the
mesures
country, overcome
anticipées,
thanks to the
aux dispositions
early
prises
measures
par les autorités,
taken by the
dans ce sens
authorities
soutenues en cela
and
par tous nos
supported in
partenaires
that
bi-
as
et
we were by
multilatéraux,
all of our
les
bi and
communautés et la
multilateral
société civile
partners
que nous
and
tenons
civil
ici à
society.
remercier
And I
à
would
nous.
like to thank them
Il
all
faut dire
here
que même
once again.
si l'Union des Comores, Dieu merci,
The Union of the
aujourd'hui
Comores,
classée dans
thankfully,
la catégorie
today
verte, la vigilance est à observer, surtout étant un pays
is
insulaire,
uh,
afin
an
d'éviter
island
une
country
nouvelle progression
and has
de
taken
cette
steps
maladie.
to avoid a new
Par
outbreak of
conséquent,
this disease.
le gouvernement comorien déploie des efforts
The government
considérables pour accompagner la population au quotidien,
thanks
notamment en ces temps de crise
countries
alimentaire
helping
mondiale
us with this
résultant de la
crisis,
COVID et aggravée
arising
par la
from
crise
COVID and also
Monsieur le Président,
worsened by the
je
Ukrainian
salue l'action
crisis.
de tous les
I
partenaires au
welcome the action
développement
of all
des
development
Comores et
partners
leur renouvelle ici.
helping the
Mes
Comores.
remercie.
And once again, I thank
Avec
you
le
for
système de
your
Nations
help.
Unies, le
With the
nouveau plan
United
cadre
Nations
pour le
system
développement
and a
durable
new framework
qui vient
for
d'être signé
sustainable
pour les 5
development
ans à
that has
venir
just been signed for
intègre
the next 5 years,
parfaitement les
that
priorités retenues
perfectly
par le plan Comores
aligns
émergent,
with the
cadre de
emerging
référence
Comores
par excellence du
development
développement de
plan.
notre pays.
That is our plan
Tous
for the
ces efforts
development of the
conjugués
country. All of
du
these efforts
gouvernement et
combined
des
of the government
partenaires
and of
bi- et
partners
multilatéraux
and
doivent converger
bi-
vers
and
un objectif
multilateral
majeur,
partners should move towards a common
celui de
goal,
l'émergence de notre
namely
pays
to
d'ici
see our
2030.
country
À ce titre,
improve by
nous comptons
2030.
organiser au pays,
And we plan
au
to
début du mois
organize
de
at
décembre
the beginning
prochain,
of
un
December
séminaire de suivi de la
a
conférence
follow-up
des
seminar
partenaires
for
au
the
développement
conference of
qui s'est
the
tenue en
partners in
France en
development
2019
that was held in
afin de
France in
mobiliser
2019
les promesses
in
faites
order
pour
to
accompagner ce défi de l'émergence d'ici 2030. Et je devrais
accompany
ainsi,
these
au niveau de
challenges
cette tribune,
before us
lancer
before
un appel
2030.
amical et
And here
fraternel
I would like
à
to
tous nos partenaires
appeal to all of
pour que
our
nous trouvions
partners
ensemble des voies et moyens
that we find ways
d'évoluer
together
vers la
to
concrétisation
move
de nos engagements à
towards
Paris visant
meeting
à
our
financer
Paris
les divers
commitments
projets retenus
to
dans ce
fund
programme.
the various
Au niveau
projects
régional,
in the program.
j'accorde une importance
Regionally,
toute particulière
we attach
dans la
particular
coopération de
importance
proximité
to
qui existe entre les
cooperation
Comores et les
with
pays
between
avec
the
lesquels
Comores
nous
and the
partageons un
countries
destin commun
with which we
dans
share
la zone de l'océan Indien.
a common
L'Union des
destiny
Comores
in the
participe
Indian
d'autre
Ocean.
part aux efforts
We
régionaux
also
visant à
participate in
assurer la
regional
sécurité
efforts
dans la
to
zone
ensure
est-africaine
security in the
et
East
apporte
African
dans ce
area,
contexte son soutien
and we provide
à la
our
République
support
sœur du
to
Mozambique
the
dans sa
friendly
lutte contre le
Republic
terrorisme,
of
un
Mozambique
fléau
in
qui
their
n'épargne
struggle
aucun pays.
against terrorism,
La
a scourge
solidarité
which spares
régionale
no country.
internationale doit
International
ainsi
solidarity
prévaloir pour mener un combat
is
sans
therefore important
merci contre
in
ce
order
fléau
to
et
fight
assurer
this
notre
scourge
sécurité à
and
tous.
ensure all of
Notre
our
présence chaque année
security.
ici aux Nations Unies
We
est la
come
preuve irréfutable de
each year to the
l'intérêt que
United
nous
Nations
accordons
to express
au multilatéralisme
our
et de
interest
notre
in
conviction sur le rôle
multilateralism
majeur
and
de
our
cette organisation
conviction
pour
of the
davantage
essential role
humaniser
of
le
this
monde.
organization to
Elle
make the world
traduit
a
cette
more
année une
humane
détermination
place.
commune entre plus
this
forte
year,
et inérablable à agir pour le bien de nos peuples
We
respectifs.
renew our
Et pour
commitment to
conclure,
work for the goods
je
of
voudrais
everyone,
insister
the good
sur
of
la
everyone,
nécessité
and I'd like to
pour la
stress
communauté
the need for
internationale
the
de
international
continuer
community
à être
to
unie et
continue to
solidaire,
be unified
car c'est
and to show
ensemble, dans un cadre
solidarity
organisé,
in
que nous trouverons les solutions
that we will
appropriées
find appropriate
aux grands défis
solutions
de notre
to
temps
the great
pour
challenges
plus de
of our
paix,
times,
de
for more
progrès
peace,
et pour le meilleur de nous
progress,
tous
and
et des
for
générations à
the
venir.
good of
Je vous remercie.
ourselves and future generations. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Union of the Comoros for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency George Mani Weah, President of the Republic of Liberia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Liberia, to welcome His Excellency George Manuel, President of the Republic of Liberia, and invite him to address the Assembly.
His Excellency Saba Korosi, President of the 77th United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to address this 77th section of the United Nations General Assembly on behalf of the government and people of Liberia. Let me congratulate His Excellency Saba Korosi on his election as President of this 77 sections of the United Nations General Assembly and assure him of Liberia's further support. I would also like to commend your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid, for a job well done in administering the affairs of the 76 sections of the General Assembly. Let me also extend my profound thanks and appreciation to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his remarkable and visionary leadership. This year's assembly is taking place at a difficult time when even as the world is recovering from the scourge of COVID-19. We continue to face the challenges of the war in Ukraine, climate change and its devastating effects on our environment. Just as the Ukrainian people are enduring the harsh impact of this unwarranted military incursion, the rest of the world is feeling the harsh consequences of economic downturn caused by disruption in global supply chain, food insecurity, and rising prices of basic goods and services. The theme of this year's assembly, a watershed movement, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges, is both appropriate and meaningful. It not only reminds us about the current state of our world and provide us the space to reflect on the multiple challenges that confront us today. They include the health and social economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, the devastating effects of climate change, environmental concerns, poverty reduction, food insecurity, and gender inequality. The challenges confronting the world today will require immediate collective global actions with the United Nations at the center of the search for solutions. In so doing, we must give special consideration to the needs of developing countries, particularly the least developed countries, in line with the Doha Program of Action for Least Developed Countries for the decade 2022-2031. Working together with the United Nations family, Liberia hereby commits to protect our planet, to promote peace, prevent conflicts, to ensure sustainable financing, and to boost partnership. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this commitment is reflected in the proper agenda for prosperity and development, which embodies the expressions of our shared determination to achieve peace, prosperity, national development, address extreme poverty, inequalities, regional disparities, infrastructure deficit, climate change, and equitable distribution of our national wealth. Given Liberia's youthful populations of more than 60%, my government initiated a youth rehabilitation and empowerment program, the social economic empowerment of disadvantaged youth project, between 2019 and 2021, with the subsequent launch of a $13 million United States national fund drive for the rehabilitation and empowerment of at-risk youth in Liberia. We remain of the firm conviction that when empowered, our youth can be a positive force for good. As Liberia Feminine in Chief, women empowerment and the promotion of gender equality remain key priorities of my government. Women do not only comprise almost half of our country's population, but they also play important roles at all levels of society and must be given equal deserved attention, support, and a place at the leadership and governance table in our society. To this end, we have developed a legal framework, including a ratification of regional and international instruments to address gender inequality, which are being carried out as a result of social, cultural perception, practices, and stereotypes that support male dominance and the subordination of women. I would like to inform you that my government, together with the UN partners, is implementing the EU Spotlight Initiative to end violence and harmful traditional practices against women and girls and promote their sexual and productive health and rights. Furthermore, the government of Liberia is currently implementing a $50 million United States ECOWAS funded project to enhance the capacity of female entrepreneurs. Mr. President, I wish to express Liberia's sincere gratitude to our local and international partners, both multilateral and bilateral, for their continued support to our national efforts in combating the pandemic. As a result of that support, Liberia is well on its way to achieving herd immunity hopefully by the end of this year, with 67% of the population already fully vaccinated. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, my government continues to take actions through the formulations of new policy framework and strategic interventions to address the impacts of climate change and protect the environment. Liberia commits to achieving a target of 64% reduction in carbon emission below business as usual by 2030. We anticipate that the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Egypt, COP27, will provide the opportunity to accelerate actions towards the goal of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Mr. President, Excellencies, sustainable development can take place only in a peaceful and secure environment. In fulfillment of our commitment to the maintenance of regional and global peace and security, Liberia takes pride as a troop contributing country, with Liberian troops and other security apparatus serving in the United Nations multidimensional integrated stabilization mission in Mali, the United Nations mission in South Sudan, and the United Nations Interim Security Forces for Abai. We thank the United Nations and our bilateral international multi-bilateral partners for the support we continue to receive in facilitating our contribution to global and regional peace and security. Mr. President, Excellencies, I am pleased to report that the IMF latest appraisal of the ongoing program it has with Liberia is very positive. It shows that inflation rates have been significantly reduced. There are now better prospects for economic growth compared to previous years, in spite of the negative effects of COVID-19. Our effort at instituting new policy measures to fight grabs were also particularly commended in the report, along with our adherence to prudent fiscal management. Mr. President, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, democracy in Liberia also continues to grow from strength to strength. After many years of civil upheaval, Liberia is becoming a stronghold for peace and a safe haven for democracy. This is because we have taken actions in the last few years to build and strengthen democratic institutions such as the press and the Liberian judiciary. We have put forward new legislation that empower the media while eradicating those that have tended to suppress free speech. I am proud to say that from the beginning of my administration to date, there is no political prisoner in Liberia. Our regional conferences of the Mana River Union and the ECOWAS, which have been called to discuss efforts to restore democracy in a few troubled spots in our West African region, Liberia has constantly and consistently pleaded for a strict adherence to constitutional terms limits and for a return to democratic civilian rule and military and legislative elections in October 2023. The forthcoming election will be crucial to consolidating our democracy. In this regard, I wish to underscore my government's unwavering commitment to ensuring that an enabling environment continues to exist for the conduct of peaceful, free, fair, transparent, and inclusive elections. This is in keeping with my commitment to ensure that the democratic will of the Liberian people is respected at all times. In the run-up to the 2023 elections, it is incumbent upon all prospective candidates to avoid the incitement of violence and any other behavior that could deprive the Liberian people of the peaceful space that they need to freely exercise their franchise and freely express their political will in choosing their leaders. We must let the people decide, and then we must respect their decision. This is indeed the true essence of democracy. Mr. President, Excellencies, if we must advance common good of humanity, the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, then international cooperation must be given primacy, and the principles of solidarity must have its rightful place. We have the platform to generate the transformative solutions we seek. The world is watching. Our people are watching. And we must now seize the moment, confront the challenges, and collectively endeavor to lift the poor from poverty and hunger, sickness and disease, and ensure progress, development, and prosperity for all. At the same time, we must protect our planet, guarantee and maintain global peace, security, and stability. Mr. President, we must pursue efforts to make the United Nations more efficient, more effective, more inclusive, more accountable, and more suited for the purpose. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Liberia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, President of the Federal Republic of Somalia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, President of the Federal Republic of Somalia, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Your Excellency, the President of the 77th Session of the United Nations General Assembly, Heads of States and Governments, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It's a great honor and privilege to address the 77th Session of the United Nations General Assembly here in New York today. At this particular challenging time in human history, I welcome the important theme of this session, which direct us all to find a transformative joint solution to the various interlocking challenges we face today. There is absolutely no doubt that today, we as a community of nations collectively face the most challenging socio-economic and environmental situation we have experienced in the modern history. In fact, I can say with sadness that the situation is dire and potentially existential. Therefore, without transformative and urgent implementable solutions to these interlocking challenges of our times, the small window of opportunity we have to act together will pass to the detriment of all our citizens and the world. Our actions today will surely determine our fate and that of the generations to come. The burden of all our shoulders is heavy, and failure is not an option. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, most of the world is still recovering from the devastating health and socio-economic impact of the global COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic was unprecedented in its impact on the daily lives of all citizens across the world, in that it changed the way we live forever and clearly presented how unprepared the world is for such shocks and disruptions. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic painfully illustrated how far apart the world is in the development and the ability to respond to such huge crises through the top-down distribution of the vaccines, with richer nations being able to invest in the distribution life-saving vaccines more rapidly for their citizens, while the developing countries like Somalia waited for whatever was available and they could afford were gifted by the international partners. While this vaccine inequally is symbolic of the existing developmental divide between the developed and the developing world, we as a community of nations understood that we must and can stand together to overcome even the greatest challenge if we have a strong global system of cooperation, collaboration, and action. In this regard, Somali federal government is grateful to all the dedicated medical professionals on the COVID-19 frontline and bilateral and multilateral partners who supported our national effort to vaccine our people and provide protection for their livelihoods through the difficult COVID-19 crisis. Today, we must ensure the global inequality of the COVID-19 vaccine is not replicated with the looming food security crisis. Our world is becoming less secure through recurring conflict and increasing international terrorism and the destructive impact of the climate change. I cannot prioritize between these three interlocking challenges because they are equally as dangerous and directly harm any progress we make anywhere in the world on achieving the vital UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. In fact, these complex and interconnected crises are the drivers of today's unprecedented international humanitarian crisis: food insecurity, rapid urbanization, and the burdensome international cost of living crisis, which is pushing most of the world's population into a poverty. Indeed, we are at the unbearable juncture in human history where citizens are looking to their respective governments and international multilateral system to provide meaningful policy response which are anchored on transformative and sustainable solutions. Accordingly, we as a community of nations must be more optimistic and work even more closely together rather than retreat to nationalistic isolation, which does not and cannot serve our global citizenry in this new age of interconnectivity and interdependence. In Somalia, we are working tirelessly to transition from over 2 decades of devastating conflict, droughts, famine, and developmental stagnation to a new age of stability, progress, and prosperity. However, despite our continuing effort, Somalia and its resilient people are facing some of the most complex and interconnected crises in the world. The crises include ongoing regional droughts, which is directly threatening the lives and the livelihoods of Somalia's most vulnerable communities. In fact, our government has called on all its business community, diaspora, and international partners international partners to work with us to do everything possible to avert a possible looming famine. We urge all our partners to heed our call and work with us to provide immediate support and relief to the most affected communities. In the long term, we must collectively work together to ensure that we mitigate the acceleration of the dangerous and costly climate crisis through meeting the commitment to invest in and adequately finance climate adaptation in most affected and vulnerable regions of the world, including sub-Saharan Africa. Key areas of investment must be sustainable water management, biodiversity protection to enhance food security, climate-smart agriculture, resilient infrastructure, and most investment in renewable energy. In Somalia, for the first time, we've established a new Ministry of Environment and Climate Change to lead on the urgent process of addressing the devastating impact of our national and regional environmental deterioration. Somalia is caught between floods and droughts annually owing to climate change and poor infrastructure. Our people, who have a long tradition of living harmoniously with nature, unfairly contributing to poisonous emissions warming the earth, are the ones that are paying with their lives today. We are therefore taking the matter of protecting our environment seriously because we know climate change is real and we are living with the evidence of its painful and destructive reality today. We also know that Somalia and the rest of the world cannot develop sustainably without the global climate crisis being jointly addressed quickly and effectively, because our whole way of life and most importantly, job-creating productive sectors of our economy, including agriculture, livestock, fisheries, and the wider blue economy, depend on the climate. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, terrorists are making our world less safe by the day. Terrorism remains a persistent and complex challenge which both contributes to and exacerbates all other crises, including food insecurity, displacement of people from their homes, and climate change. Terrorists have no religion or human values. They are violent criminals who seek to simply terrorize innocent people. We must continue to stand up to them with all our collective strength and effort. Nowhere in the world has there been an example of terrorist organizations succeeding against a united governments and people, let alone govern justly as they falsely claim. The most important lesson we have learned in the long modern war against international terrorists and the terrorism is that neither can be contained or degraded. They need to be comprehensively defeated wherever they are. In Somalia, we are actively fighting the terrorist group called Al-Shabaab, who are Al-Qaeda affiliate, and ISIS separately. Both are criminally misrepresenting the beautiful and the peaceful Islamic religion and values to destabilize the region and in the process terrorize the Somali people and their brothers and sisters in the neighboring countries and across the world. In recent weeks, the unprovoked violent and senseless actions of Al-Shabaab against innocent civilians across Somalia has highlighted the urgent need for an expedited common national and international response to defeating them on a permanent basis to advance regional and global security. At the height of the humanitarian crisis, this group, which falsely claims to be Islamic, blew up desperately needed water wells, water catchments, banned transport, carrying food, and killed innocent people who were already struggling to live because of the impact of the severe drought in our country today. This is the true criminal and despicable face and intentions of the terrorists and terrorism. On our part, the Somali federal government and its federal member states, with the direct support of our brave and resilient people, are responding by challenging and defeating terrorist groups in major localities in which they still remain some parts. The Somali people have begun to organically rise up in support of their government's call to defeat themselves and their nation from the evils of terror. As recently as this past month, more towns and villages were recovering from our offensive military operations with the support of the local communities. We are now confident that some enhanced public support, our government will eliminate terrorism from Somalia. Because the Somali people have finally realized that Al-Shabaab's repressive actions will not end until we all take action to achieve this. In a nutshell, the Somali people now believe Al-Shabaab can and only be defeated, and this is our real source of energy and inspiration as a government in the fight against international terrorism. As the policy level, the Somali government will continue to work with all its partners, including the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, in the fight against global terrorism. We are fully committed to doing the heavy lifting to secure our future. However, to deliver the killer blow to the violence and the insecurity, we must think past the notions of containing and degrading Al-Shabaab or any other terrorist organization anywhere in the world. We know these policies are no longer as effective as they were once thought to be at this advanced stage in the fight against the ever-evolving global terrorism threat. Instead, we need to focus all our joint effort on Somali government's new strategy of military, ideological, and financially challenging terrorism and terrorists to ensure that they are comprehensively defeated once and for all and quickly. Furthermore, the Somali government is sincerely committed to working with all the partners to effectively train, equip, and sustain its armed forces with a view to ongoing forward fully. That is the only long-term sustainable solution for stability and progress our country and the region and the world at large. This effort is Somali government is paying within the complex network of challenges of the climate change effects and the poverty at the present. Ladies, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, without predictable and committed national and international financing, it's not possible to realize transformative solution to financing It is not possible to realize transformative solution to the interlocking challenge we face today. In Somalia, we are working to enhance our economic capacity through a rigorous economic and financial reform program. This will strengthen Somalia's economic fundamental, improve public financial management, and mobilize more urgently needed domestic resources to respond to the crisis more sustainably and swiftly. We are very much grateful for international financing organizations like the World Bank and the IMF, who is supporting Somalia to make a real reform, economic and financial reform. However, given Somalia's fragile economic situation as a recovering post-conflict state, financing global development priorities must be underpinned by a common international commitment to support countries like ours with more concessionary financing capacity building, and investment in all areas that can strengthen resilience to today's multiple crises, including climate change, security, and the provision of social protection for the most vulnerable in our societies. We must also facilitate and promote private sector investment and participation in overcoming these challenges to transition from simply what is now referred to as a corporate social responsibility to common social prosperity, in which we all contribute our fair share, and our governments must facilitate and improve further the enabling environment necessary for that private investment. In conclusion, there is no escaping the global vicious cycle of complex and interconnected crises which challenges our citizens and the wider world. More worryingly, they have become repetitive and without a strong bilateral, multilateral, civil society and private sector partnership, they cannot be addressed effectively anywhere or by any single nation or geographic region alone. In the absence of urgent and effective joint action starting today, the dream of achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 will remain just that, a mere distant dream. On our part, the Somali government is committed and determined to defeat international terrorism with all our international partners, tackle extreme poverty, raise the environmental consciousness of our population, mitigate the worst of the climate change impact, and rebuild an inclusive, resilient, and people-centered society and economy through our successful ongoing socio-economic reform program. These are the basis for the transformative solutions that will help us mitigate and overcome the interlocking challenges that our nations face today and pave the way for a future progress and prosperity. The most important lessons we learned from dealing with the multiple complex and interconnected crises in Somalia is that we must not always be behind and plan for and respond to the worst cases of emergency. When we have many early national and international warning systems in place, it's better and more just and prudent to plan ahead and focus on building resilience by finding and financing durable solutions that help to deliver sustainable development for the most vulnerable across the world. In Somalia, we have a wise saying, and it is, one finger cannot wash a whole face. If we work together sincerely, collaboratively as a community of nations, no challenge, no matter how big it is insurmountable. I thank you all.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Somalia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Evariste Ndayishimiye, President of the Republic of Burundi. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Evariste Ndayishimiye, President of the Republic of Burundi, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Nous rendons d'abord grâce à Dieu le Tout-Puissant,
Thanks to
le
God,
tout
the
miséricordieux,
Almighty and
pour nous
All-Powerful,
avoir
and the
permis
Merciful,
de participer
for having
à
allowed
ces
us to
assises ici,
participate
dans cette belle ville
in
de New York,
this forum
dans de
in
très
the
bonnes
beautiful
conditions.
city of New York in such
Excellences,
pleasant
Monsieur
conditions.
Sabah Korossi,
Excellencies,
président
Mr.
de
Chaba
la
Keroshi, President of the
77e
77th
session ordinaire de l'Assemblée générale
session
des
of
Nations
the
Unies.
United Nations General Assembly,
Excellences,
Excellencies,
Mesdames, Messieurs les chefs d'État et de
Heads of State and
gouvernement,
Government,
Majesté,
Your Majesties,
Monsieur le Secrétaire général
Secretary General
des Nations
of the
Unies,
United Nations,
Mesdames, Messieurs les chefs de délégation,
Heads of Delegation,
distingués délégués,
distinguished
Mesdames,
delegates,
Messieurs.
ladies and
À
gentlemen.
l'entame de mes
At the
propos,
outset,
permettez-moi,
allow me,
Excellences,
Your
Monsieur le
Excellency,
Président,
Mr. President,
d'exprimer
to
à juste
express,
titre
and
mes
rightly
sincères
so,
remerciements à
my
l'endroit du
deepest
gouvernement
thanks to
et du
the
peuple
government and
américain,
people of the United
plus
States of
particulièrement
America.
celui de New
I
York,
particularly extend
pour
my thanks to
l'accueil
the
et
people and
l'hospitalité
authorities of New
légendaire
York
réservés
for
à
the
moi-même
legendary
et à la
hospitality that
délégation
has
qui
been shown
m'accompagne.
to me and my company
Je voudrais
delegation.
également
I also
exprimer
wish
mes
to
vives
convey
et
my
chaleureuses
heartfelt
félicitations
congratulations
à son
to
Excellence
His Excellency
Kaba
Mr.
Korossi
Chaba
pour
Keroshi
sa brillante élection
for his
à la
deft election
présidence de la
to the presidency
77e
of the
session de
77th
l'Assemblée
session
générale de
of
l'Organisation
the
des Nations
United
Unies.
Nations General Assembly.
Le Burundi,
Burundi,
à travers ma
through
voix,
me,
vous assure, Monsieur le
assures you, Mr.
Président,
President,
de son plein
of
soutien
its
et entière
full
coopération
support
tout
and
au long de votre
cooperation
mandat
as
au
you
service
discharge your
de
mandate
l'humanité.
in service of
Il
humankind.
me plaît par la même occasion
I would also like to
d'exprimer ma
take this
profonde
opportunity to
gratitude
express my
à
deep
votre
gratitude to
prédécesseur,
your predecessor,
Monsieur Abdullah
Mr.
Shahid,
Abdullah Shahid,
pour le travail
for the
remarquable
remarkable work
abattu dans des
conducted
conditions
in
extrêmement
incredibly
difficiles,
difficult
marquées par
conditions
la crise
in a
actuelle
context marked by the
consécutive
current crisis
à la
which
pandémie de
followed the
COVID-19 et
COVID-19
les crises
pandemic,
sécuritaires
as well
dans
as
plusieurs
security
régions
crises
du monde.
shaking several regions of the
C'est
world.
dans ce même cadre
I
que j'aurai
also wish
hommage
to
mérité
pay a
au
much
secrétaire
deserved
général
tribute
de notre
to the
organisation,
Secretary General of
Monsieur
our
Antonio
organization,
Guterres,
Mr.
qui
Antonio
n'a ménagé
Guterres.
aucun
He has
effort
spared no
pour
effort
accomplir
to
convenablement sa
discharge his
mission
mission
dans cette dure
so well
conjoncture
in this
marquée
difficult
par
juncture,
diverses
marked
crises
by
et
several
paradoxes.
crises.
Excellences, Monsieur le Président,
Excellencies, Mr. President,
Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs,
Excellencies, ladies and
un adage
gentlemen,
burundais
a
que
Burundian
je vous
saying
traduis
that
directement
I'd like
ici.
to translate
Dans un
here
climat de paix,
states,
la
in
serpette peut
times of
servir de
peace,
tondeuse pour dire
sides
que
can become
là où il y a la
plowshares.
paix,
In other
tout est
words,
possible.
in times of
Le
peace,
monde
everything is
d'aujourd'hui
possible.
devrait s'en
Today's
inspirer.
world must draw inspiration
Malheureusement,
from that
aujourd'hui,
proverb.
le monde est
Unfortunately,
devenu
today,
une
the
immense
world has
tour
become
où nous assistons,
a vast
nos yeux pleins
arena
de
in
larmes
which we
à
watch,
des actes
eyes full of
macabres
tears,
dans
gruesome
certaines
acts being
nations du
perpetrated
monde
in
à
certain
cause des
nations
guerres, des
across the
massacres
world
horribles,
as a result of
des flux
wars,
des réfugiés ainsi que les sécurités alimentaires
bloody massacres,
aujourd'hui de subir
Today,
des
countries
soubresauts
across the
de
world
la
are
situation
enduring
en
turbulence
Ukraine,
as a result of
en
the
Afrique.
situation in
Le
Ukraine.
terrorisme et
In
l'extrémisme
Africa,
violent
terrorism and
frappent
violent
encore
extremism
dans
continue
la
to
région du
lash the
Sahel,
region of the
dans la corne
Sahel,
de l'Afrique
the Horn of
et en
Africa,
Afrique
and
centrale,
Central
avec
Africa.
une
And
tendance
we're seeing
de
a trend
l'étendre
for
vers la
these
région
scourges
sud
to
de
spread
l'Afrique.
to the
Il en est de
south
même
of
dans les
Africa.
autres parties du monde.
The same things are being
Car,
seen
à
in
tort
other
remarqué,
regions of the
le
world because, as
terrorisme
we've
n'a pas de
stated,
frontières.
terrorism knows
Les
no
changements
borders.
climatiques
Climate change,
qui causent des
which
famines
causes famines,
n'ont pas de
knows
limite.
no bounds.
Mais ensemble,
But together,
avec la volonté
political
politique,
will,
nous pouvons
we
vaincre
can
ces fléaux. J'en
conquer
suis
these
confiant.
scourges. I am sure
J'en
of
suis
it.
confiant.
I'm sure of it,
Et ça, c'est Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
car mon
because
pays, le
my country,
Burundi,
Burundi, knows
en sait
all
trop
too
suite
well,
aux crises politiques
following
répétitives
successive political
que
crises
nous avons
that we have
traversées,
endured,
qui non seulement ont détruit
that
les
not
vies humaines,
only have
mais
destroyed
aussi
human lives,
l'environnement.
but also the
Aujourd'hui,
environment.
nous
We
nous
know this
sommes
context all too
rétablis
well.
et le
Today,
pays marche bien
we
dans
have
la voie
recovered
vers
and
son
the country
développement
is walking boldly along the
socio-économique.
path towards
Le Burundi
socio-economic
essaie de
development.
marcher dans cette
Burundi
ligne,
is attempting to
profitant
walk
des
this
dividendes
path
de la paix,
by
de
harnessing
la
the dividends
sécurité,
of peace and
de la
security,
stabilité et de la
stability
cohésion
and social
sociale
cohesion
retrouvée grâce au Burundi
restored
eux-mêmes,
thanks to the people
mais
of Burundi
également
themselves,
à la
but also
contribution de la
thanks to the
communauté
contribution
internationale.
made by the international
Nous souhaitons
community.
donc que l'esprit de
As
paix
such,
de
We
fraternité
want to
et de
see the
justice
spirit of peace,
soit le souci
brotherhood,
de
and
tous,
justice be
pour
a
que
shared
tous les peuples
concern,
du
so that
monde
all
jouissent
peoples of the
pleinement
world
de
can
leur
fully
droit de
enjoy
bien
their
vivre
rights
dans la
to
dignité.
live happily and
Et
in
sur le plan
dignity.
humanitaire,
In
le
terms of
Burundi a
humanitarian
accueilli sur son
assistance,
sol
Burundi has
avec
welcomed
chaleur et
onto its
dignité
territory
les
with
milliers de
warmth and
réfugiés en
dignity
provenance de
thousands
la
of
République
refugees
démocratique du Congo,
coming from the
toute
Democratic
ethnie
Republic of
confondue.
the Congo in all their
Excellences,
ethnic
Mesdames,
diversity.
Messieurs,
Excellencies, ladies and
la paix
gentlemen,
est un sujet qui nous
peace
tient à
is
cœur.
something we hold
Son
dear.
absence
Its absence
pèse
weighs
lourdement sur
heavy
la vie de nos peuples.
on the day-to-day lives
C'est
of
dans
our
cet
peoples.
esprit
It is with this
que
in mind that
nous permettrons
we
en aucun
will
instant
never
de nous
flinch,
dérober
not for one
chaque
second,
fois qu'il
when it
s'agira
comes to
d'exécuter des décisions
making
sécuritaires
decisions related
issues
to
de
matters
cette
of
majestueuse
security,
et importante
or rather
organisation
implementing
internationale
these
qu'est
decisions once
l'Organisation
they've
des
emerged
Nations Unies.
from this illustrious and
C'est
crucial
dans ce
forum that
souci
is
que
the
le
United
Burundi
Nations
ne
Organization.
cesse de se battre
It is bolstered by this
bec et ongles
conviction
pour
that
contribuer
Burundi
au
will
retour
never
de
let
la
up in
paix
its tooth and
dans le
nail
pays
struggle to
où elle est
contribute to the
troublée,
return of
dans le
peace
cadre
to
des
all
Nations
countries
Unies
where it has
ou
been
dans celle
disturbed.
de
We
l'Union
will do this
africaine
within the
ou
United
de la
Nations,
région.
within the
En
African Union,
témoigne
or in other
notre
regional bodies.
intervention en Somalie
Proof of this
et
commitment
en
is
Centrafrique.
our current
Dans le
intervention in
même souci,
Somalia and the
le
CAR.
Burundi s'est
In the
engagé
same vein,
à
Burundi has
contribuer
committed
au retour de la
to
paix
contributing
à la
to
République
returning
démocratique du
peace
Congo
to the
dans le
Democratic
cadre de
Republic of the
l'initiative de
Congo
la
as
communauté
part of an East
est-africaine.
African Community
Je profite
Initiative.
de cette
I'd
occasion
like to take this
pour demander
opportunity
à la
to
communauté
request
internationale
that the international
d'appuyer le
community
processus de
support
Nairobi
the
pour
Nairobi
secourir le
process
peuple congolais
to
en détresse.
give succor to
Toujours
the
dans le
Congolese
cadre de
people
la
in
paix
distress.
et la sécurité,
Still discussing peace
la
and security
participation
now,
à cette session
my
me suggère de solliciter
participation
très
in
humblement
this session compels
l'implication
me
des Nations
to
Unies
humbly
pour
request that the
traquer les
United
groupes
Nations
terroristes
lend their
qui
assistance
commencent
as we
à
attempt
s'infiltrer
to
dans notre
pursue
sous-région, sans
terrorist groups
oublier
which
ceux qui
are beginning
sévissent
to
déjà
infiltrate
dans d'autres
our
coins du
sub-region,
monde.
of course not
La
forgetting those
communauté
terrorist
de
groups
l'Afrique
that are
de
already
l'Est,
raging in
dont
other
le
corners of
Burundi
the world.
assure la
The
présidence,
East African
vient
community,
d'accueillir un
of
nouveau
which
membre
Burundi is
la
now
République
chair,
démocratique du
has just
Congo.
welcomed a
Et
new
avec
member,
les
the
autres chefs
DRC,
d'État
and
des
with
pays
other
membres,
heads of state,
nous nous
heads of
sommes
state of
donnés
member
comme
countries,
objectif
we have
de
set ourselves the
stabiliser
goal
toute la
of
communauté
stabilizing
pour que
the
les
whole
populations
community
de
so
nos
that the
pays,
peoples of our
pour
country
permettre aux populations de nos pays de se
can
concentrer
finally
en fait au projet de
focus
développement
on
socio-économique.
socio-economic development.
C'est pour cette raison
is for
que le
this
gouvernement
that
burundais
the government of
est en
Burundi
train de
is
développer
currently
les
developing
infrastructures
its
de
road
transport
infrastructure,
telles que
its
la voie
and its
routière,
transport
la
infrastructure more
voie
generally,
ferrée et la
railways,
voie aérienne,
and
ainsi que le transport
air
lacustre
infrastructure. We're
afin de
also
réussir l'approche
developing
multimodale et
multimodal transport
interconnectée
and
au niveau
and our
national et
lake transport
sous-régional qui
network so
s'impose
that we can
à mon pays
connect
de manière
our whole nation and
incontournable.
connect it up with the
Le
sub-region.
Burundi,
And
ensemble
that's
avec
vital for
la
my country.
RDC
Together with
et la
the
Tanzanie,
DRC
travaille
and
étroitement
Tanzania,
pour
Burundi
réaliser le
is
projet
working
ambitieux de
closely
chemin
and
de fer
tirelessly to lend new
Uvinza,
momentum to the
Musongati,
railway
Gitega,
project linking
Bujumbura,
Uvinza,
Uvira
Musongati, Gitega,
et
Bujumbura,
Kindu, des voies
Uvira, and
reliées
Kindu.
les trois pays
This
et les deux océans
railway
Atlantique
project
et
should
Indien.
link three
Ce
countries
méga projet
and
permettra non
the
seulement
Atlantic
de
and
booster
Indian
les
Ocean.
économies
This
des trois
mega
pays,
project will not
mais
only
également
lend
de faciliter
new
la
life
circulation
to the
des biens
economies of
et
our
des
three
personnes
countries, but will also
dans
make
la
it easier
sous-région.
for goods and people
Nous
to move
souhaitons
through
que
the
les États
sub-region.
membres des Nations Unies se
We
lèvent
wish to
comme
see the member
un
states
seul
of the
homme
United
pour
Nations
protéger et promouvoir
rise up
tous les
and
droits
speak with
humains
one voice
de doit
to
jouir
protect and promote
l'humanité sans distinction
the human
aucune.
rights that all humans should
Nous
enjoy
apprécions
without
ce qui
exception.
se fait déjà
We
aujourd'hui,
appreciate what's
mais
already
il
been
reste
done
encore
today,
à faire
but
pour
work has
que
yet to be
l'homme
done
jouisse
so
pleinement
that all
de tous
people
les
can
droits
fully
que lui
enjoy all of the
confère
rights
la nature
which
humaine.
they should enjoy by
C'est pour
virtue
cela
simply
que je
of being a
profite
human
de cette
being.
occasion
It is for
pour
this reason
remercier
that I wish to
vivement
take
la
this
communauté
opportunity to
internationale
warmly thank
pour
the
les
international
efforts qu'elle
community
a
for the
fournis
efforts
pour
it has
rétablir
made
la paix
to
et la
restore peace
stabilité
and
dans mon
stability
pays. Dans ce
to
cadre,
my country.
il me convient de
In
porter
that
à la
vein, I
connaissance de
wish
cette
to
auguste
inform this
assemblée
august First Assembly
qu'une justice
that
équitable
equitable
pour
justice
tous
for
est
all
aujourd'hui
is
une
today a
réalité
reality
et que les
in
droits de
Burundi.
l'homme,
Human
dont le
rights
droit
and
d'expression et de
including the
presse
freedom of
sont
expression and the
respectés
press
sur toute
are
l'étendue du
respected
territoire
across
burundais.
all of Burundian territory.
Mais malheureusement,
However,
Certains fonctionnaires
Certain
portant le
officials
flambeau de certaines
carrying the
institutions
torch
de
of
notre
certain
organisation
institutions of our
découragent
organization
ce développement positif
are
par la
stymieing and
politisation de
discouraging
la
this positive
démocratie
development
et de la
through the
lutte contre
politicization of
l'impunité.
democracy and the
Dans certains
politicization of the
pays,
fight
y
against
compris le
impunity.
mien,
In
quand
certain
la
countries,
démocratie
including my
telle
own,
qu'elle est
when
définie
democracy
s'enracine,
as it is defined
certains
begins to
fonctionnaires
take
des
root,
Nations
some
Unies
United
la
Nations
dénature
officials
à la
distort
qualifiant
it
d'incrédible
by
ou
labeling it
de non
as not
inclusive
credible
pour
or
nous
not
maintenir dans
inclusive,
des tensions
and that
inutiles.
serves to keep us in a
Quand
state
nous nous
of
battons
fruitless
au
tension.
quotidien contre
When
l'impunité,
we struggle
certains fonctionnaires
day
des
by
Nations
day
Unies
to
cherchent encore à
to fight
disqualifier
against
nos
impunity,
actions.
certain United
Il est
Nations civil
alors
servants
grand temps,
continue
Monsieur
to
le Président,
seek to
que le
discredit
Haut
our
Commissariat
actions.
des droits de
It is
l'homme
therefore high time,
soit
Mr.
en
President, the High
diapason
Commissioner for
avec
Human Rights
l'ensemble
be
des
in
États
tune with all
membres
of Member
pour
States,
avoir une lecture
to
commune
have a shared
de la
reading
direction
of the
des politiques
direction
de nos
taken by my
pays
country's
au lieu
policies,
de
rather than
vouloir
simply wanting to
téléguider ces
remote
actions
control
à
their
travers
actions
des
through
commissions
various
et des
commissions
bureaux
and
des
offices
rapporteurs
and
spéciaux
special rapporteurs.
inattendus. Le moment est venu, Monsieur le Président,
The time has
pour que les
come,
Nations
President,
Unies
for the
reconnaissent
United
les
Nations to
avancées
recognise the
réalisées par
progress
mon
made
pays
by my
depuis
country over the
17 ans
last 17
et
years,
comprennent que
and
le statut
for the UN
de
to
pays
understand
fragile
that the
ne
status of a
s'applique plus
fragile
au
country no
Burundi.
longer applies to Burundi.
Excellences, Monsieur le Président,
Excellencies,
Excellences, Mesdames,
President,
Messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen.
l'homme est au cœur de l'économie depuis la famille
Humankind is at the
jusqu'au
heart
niveau
of our
mondial.
economy, from the
Nous
scale of
devons
the family
donc
to the world
au
as a whole.
développement
We
du
must therefore
capital
contribute to
humain
the development of
en
human
dotant à
capital,
nos populations
providing our
des
people
outils
with the
appropriés,
appropriate
des
tools,
expériences et
experience,
des savoirs
and
adaptés
adapted
aux exigences de la
skills
vie
that are adapted to the
aujourd'hui.
demands
Nous
of
devons
the day
trouver
and age.
des solutions
We
pour
must find
contrecarrer
solutions to
les
counter the
menaces à notre
threats to our
économie,
economy,
à notre
to
santé,
our health,
à notre système
to our
éducatif,
education
à notre
system,
cohabitation
to our peaceful
pacifique,
coexistence.
bref,
In a
à
word,
notre façon de
to
vivre
our
dans nos États
way of
et entre les
living
États
and living
du
well
monde.
within our states
Nous
and
savons
between
que
states around the
l'Organisation
world.
des
We know
Nations
the United
Unies a le
Nations
souci de contribuer
is working
à
to
l'amélioration
contribute
des
to
conditions
improving the
de vie
standards of
des
living
populations du
for
monde
people around the
par
world.
l'accès
This is
à des
done through
revenus familiaux
accessing
suffisants
sufficient family
pour assurer
income
un niveau de
to
vie
ensure
décent.
a decent standard of living.
L'éducation constitue un élément
Education
clé
is a
pour y
key tool
parvenir.
to achieve this.
Par là,
Now,
effectivement, de
indeed, speaking of
l'éducation,
education,
je ne saurais
no one
être
could,
plus explicite
could put it better
que
than Nelson
Nelson
Mandela,
Mandela quand il a dit, je
who
cite,
said, and I quote, education is the most powerful
la plus
weapon to
puissante
change the
pour
world.
changer le monde. Fin de
End of
citation.
quote.
Plusieurs années après
Several years
cette célèbre
after
citation,
this famous
cette piste de
quotation,
solution pour opérer un
this
changement
is
positif
a way
au
of,
sein de nos
this remains
communautés
a way of
reste
achieving
toujours
positive change within
d'actualité.
our communities and remains
L'éducation
so.
permet aux
Education
jeunes
allows
d'avoir
young
des
people to have
aspirations
hopes and
et des
dreams for
ambitions
the
pour
future,
l'avenir et
and
constitue
is
un
an
outil
effective
efficace
tool
de lutte
in
contre
itself
la
to fight against
violence et le
violence and
terrorisme.
terrorism.
C'est ainsi que
It's
dans
thus,
mon pays,
in my
nous
country,
sommes en
we are
train d'initier des
currently
réformes,
launching
de repenser à la
reforms.
politique
We
du système
are
éducatif
rethinking our
afin de
policy,
rendre
our
notre
education
jeunesse
policy,
plus
so that our
professionnelle
young
que
people
serviteur
can
de la
become
fonction publique.
more than
Nous
merely
constatons
public
joyeusement
servants. We
que dans
are
mon pays,
pleased
la
to note that in
gratuité
my
de
country,
l'éducation a sensiblement augmenté
the
l'engouement pour
education
l'école,
is
tant
free
pour
of
les
charge, and this
filles
has
que pour les
significantly
garçons, et
increased
que les
the
abandons
attendance at
scolaires
school by
au
girls
niveau
and
de
boys,
l'enseignement de base
and
sont souvent liés
school
à
dropout
l'insuffisance
rates, which is
alimentaire,
often
à
linked
l'éloignement
to
des écoles
food
et au
scarcity, or the
manque
fact
de
that
frais
schools are very
scolaires
far away
ont
from home, or there aren't
sensiblement
enough
diminué. Afin
money
de
to cover
transformer les jeunes
education.
en agents
School
de
dropout rates
paix
have therefore
et du
significantly
développement
fallen.
inclusif
In
au
order to
Burundi,
transform our young people into
nous
agents
avons
for
mis
peace
en
and
place
inclusive
un
development
programme
in Burundi,
ambitieux
we've set up an
d'autonomisation
ambitious
économique et
economic
d'emploi des jeunes
empowerment
qui a
program
pour
and a
mission
young
de réduire le
a
taux de
young
chômage
person's,
par
jobs
la
program,
création de
which
l'emploi
aims to
des jeunes
reduce
à travers
unemployment through
l'entrepreneuriat.
creating jobs for young people
Pour
for
accompagner ce
entrepreneurship.
programme,
To support
nous
this
avons
program,
mis à la
we
disposition
have made
de la
available
jeunesse
for young
la banque
people
d'investissement
a
des jeunes et
a
un fonds
young person's
d'inversion,
investment
de
bank
garantie et
and a
d'accompagnement
support and
en
guarantee
vue de leur
fund for
faciliter
them to
l'accès
facilitate
au
access to
crédit.
credit.
Il en est de même
This is also
pour
true
les femmes qui,
for women
d'ailleurs, occupent
who
un pourcentage élevé
are
parmi
indeed a large
les jeunes féminine
member of
burundais.
Burundian
Nous
Young
avons
People.
créé la
We
Banque
created an
d'investissement
investment
pour les
bank for
femmes
women,
et continuons
to
les
undertake
réformes
reforms
visant
that
à
seek to
améliorer
improve
la
health
santé et
and
l'éducation
education
féminine.
for women.
L'Office
The
dont la
office
première
of
dame
the
du Burundi
First
a
Lady in
ouvert un
Burundi
hôpital pour traiter les fistules
opened a hospital to
obstétricales
treat
chez
obstetric
les
fistula.
femmes. Et avec
And
les
with our
partenariats
development
les
partners
partenaires au
in
développement
Burundi,
du Burundi, elle continue d'innover
the
pour
office
améliorer
continues to innovate,
considérablement
to
la vie de la femme
seek to
burundaise.
improve the
Monsieur le
standard of living
Président,
of Burundian women.
l'urgence se trouve
President,
en même temps
it
dans la
is
gestion des effets
indeed still an
dévastateurs
urgent issue when we
de
think
la
to
pandémie
look at the
COVID-19.
managing the
Violence à
devastating
cet effet,
impacts of the
un vibrant
COVID-19
appel à
pandemic.
l'ensemble des
I
partenaires au
I would like to
développement
therefore
du
appeal
continent
to all
africain
partners,
à
development
prendre
partners in the
des
African
mesures
continent and
courageuses
urge them to take
destinées
brave
à
measures to
accompagner
support
les économies
economies
des États
of
africains
African
qui
states
sont très
which have been
durement
very
affectés
seriously
par
affected
les effets des
by the
différentes crises
ramifications of
actuelles.
different crises.
Ayant
at the moment.
conscience
As whereas
qu'aucun
we
pays
are
au
that
monde
no
n'a
country
été
around
créé
the
pour
world was
être assisté
created to receive
éternellement.
help
Cet
eternally,
accompagnement devrait
this
se
support
faire
should be done
à travers des
through
partenariats
mutually
stratégiques
beneficial strategic
mutuellement
partnerships.
avantageux, axés entre autres
These to be focused
sur
entirely
les
on
investissements,
investment,
la
promotion
promotion
of
des
trade,
échanges commerciaux et le transfert de
technology
technologies.
transfer.
Et pour réussir
In order
le
to
développement du capital
succeed in
humain
developing
et rendre
human
la
capital,
population dynamique
and in order
et
to make
productive,
our population
le gouvernement est en
productive,
train
a
de
government
doter
is
à chaque
currently
commune au
providing
moins
each
d'un
district with at
hôpital
least one
et des
hospital
centres de
and
santé
healthcare
pour
centres
prévenir
to
et soigner
prevent
les
and
maladies,
care
les
for
épidémies et
and
les
treat
pandémies.
diseases, epidemics,
Nous
and
nous
pandemics.
félicitons pour avoir
We
pu lutter
are
efficacement contre
proud to
la
have been
pandémie
able
de
to effectively
COVID-19,
fight against the
mais la lutte
COVID-19
continue.
pandemic, but the fight
Je
continues.
vous informe aussi
I would like to
que la
inform you
gratuité
also
des soins de santé
that health
est
care
assurée
is
pour les
free
enfants de moins
for
de 5
children
ans
of under
et
5
pour les
years of
femmes
age and for
enceintes
pregnant women
qui accouchent
who give
dans
birth
les
in
hôpitaux et centres de
public
santé
hospitals and
publics,
health care
ce qui a
centres.
réduit
This
sensiblement
has
la
made a significant
mortalité
reduction
infantile.
to infant mortality.
Dans ce cadre, le combat engagé pour le
Within this
développement
framework,
économique
the
de
fight
mon
that we are
pays
waging for
passe
economic
d'abord par le
development of my
développement du
country
secteur agricole.
includes
C'est à cet
particularly
effet
developing the
que mon
agricultural sector.
gouvernement a
To
baptisé
this
cette
end, my
année
government
l'année de l'agriculture au
christened this
Burundi
year
sur
the
le thème
agricultural
général.
year in Burundi under
L'agriculture,
the topic of
l'agriculture source
agriculture as
de
a
l'économie
source of
nationale. Notre
supporting our
programme en
national
matière de
economy.
développement agricole
Our
passe
agricultural
avant
development
tout
program
par le changement de
includes
mentalité
changing
et de pratiques
mentalities and
actuelles.
current practices.
Nous incitons la
We are encouraging
population
the
à
population
viser plus loin
to
en
reach
ne se
higher
contentant pas
and
de
not
produire
simply
pour
content
consommer
themselves with
localement,
producing,
mais aussi et surtout
developing to
pour
consume
l'exportation.
locally, but
À
also to
unir
focus
ses
on
forces
exports,
pour
to
travailler
pool their
ensemble
efforts, to work
en
together
coopérative
with
agricole,
agricultural
à viser
cooperatives,
le remplacement progressif
and
de la
progressively
roue par
replace
des outils
hoes
modernes
with
et des
modern
technologies
tools and
agricoles.
agricultural technology.
Dans le cadre de
In the
l'environnement,
framework of the
le
environment, we're
Burundi
looking at the
ne reste
environment
pas
now.
les bras
Burundi
croisés,
is not sitting
surtout
idle here either,
que nous
particularly because
connaissons
we
des
are
cas de
experiencing cases
sécheresse
of
dans
drought
certaines
in some
régions, des
regions,
crues des
as well
rivières
as
et des
floods from
lacs,
rivers and
des
lakes,
inondations et des
and
glissements de terrain
landslides, which
qui emportent
sometimes
parfois des
can be
vies,
deadly.
des
They
maisons,
can carry away
des plantations,
houses,
entraînant
farms,
ainsi
plantations, and
l'insuffisance
then
alimentaire.
leading to food
Face à cela,
shortages.
le Burundi se
But faced
joint
with
à la
this,
décision du
Burundi
monde en réalisant
rallies with the
des
decision
travaux de
made to
protection,
carry
de
out protection,
conservation et de
conservation,
gestion
and
de
environmental
l'environnement
management
à
work.
travers des
And
activités
this is done through
diverses
various
sur
activities
tout le territoire
throughout the country.
national. Tout cela
All of this
s'accompagne
is
par
accompanied by
l'apprentissage
learning
à la
on
résilience
how to
contre
be
le changement
resilient to
climatique,
climate change,
par non
not
seulement
only
la
through
pratique de l'irrigation
practicing
collinaire, mais
sustainable
aussi
irrigation,
par
but
des
also
actions de
through
protection
activities to
du sol
protect
en
soil
traçant les
and
courbes de
also
niveau et
marking
en
out
reboisant
contours
tous
and
les terrains
reforesting Burundi et
couverts.
Bumbaye,
Dans mon pays,
Burundi
le jour de jeudi
with
chaque
covered.
semaine est consacré
In my
à cet
country,
effet
every
sur tout le
Thursday
territoire
is
national.
dedicated to these efforts across
Nous
the
devons
country.
aussi veiller à développer
We should
progressivement
also
les
seek
infrastructures
to
d'appui à la
progressively develop
production, en
infrastructures to support
particulier
production,
l'énergie et
particularly
le
of energy
transport,
and transport,
pour mieux assurer la
to
croissance
better support
des autres
growth
secteurs
in
porteurs
other
de
sectors
croissance
that
et
lead
d'emploi.
to that then create
Le
jobs.
gouvernement burundais a
The Burundian
entrepris
government
un
has
vaste chantier de développement
started
du
a
secteur
large
énergétique
amount of work
par la
on the energy
mobilisation des
sector
ressources
through the
à travers
mobilization
des
of
cofinancements
resources through
et les investissements du
co-financing
secteur
and
privé.
private sector
Il
investment.
s'agit de mettre en valeur
The aim here is
les
to
potentiels
showcase the
hydroélectriques
potential
et
of
solaires,
hydroelectric
de
and
la tourbe,
solar
des ressources
panels
géothermiques
and
et des déchets
geothermic
municipaux.
resources
Les
and
deux secteurs que
how
j'envisage
to
de
manage
mettre en
municipal
exergue
waste.
apportent également
as well as
un
peat.
appui crucial à
The two sectors that
l'exploitation
I've just
des
mentioned
potentialités du
also
secteur minier.
that I've just
Nous
underscored
voulons ici
also provide crucial support
développer un
to
partenariat
developing
technique
the
et
mining
financier
sector. We
mutuellement
wish here to
avantageux
develop a
et
technical
équilibré
financial
dans le
partnership that is
domaine de
mutually
la
beneficial and
prospection,
balanced in
de
the field of
l'exploitation et de
prospecting,
la transformation
exploitation,
des produits
and
miniers et
processing
géologiques
of
dont
minerals and
les études
geological projects.
réalisées révèlent
And
un
studies that have been
sous-sol
carried
très
out
riche
have shown that we
et
have a
encore
very
vierge.
rich and as of yet
Monsieur le
unexploited
Président,
subsoil.
Mesdames, Messieurs,
President, ladies and
pour
gentlemen,
que la paix
so
et le
that
développement soient
peace
une
and
réalité,
development
il faut que la bonne
becomes a reality,
gouvernance
we
et la bonne
need to
gestion
ensure
des
good
finances
governance
publiques
and good
soient
management
mis
of
en
public
avant.
finances.
Cela permet non
This
seulement
allows
de
not only
combattre
to
les frustrations au
tackle
sein des citoyens
frustrations
qui sont d'ailleurs à
amongst our
l'origine des
citizens
conflits
which
sociaux,
are rooted
mais
in
aussi
social conflict, but also
permet
it allows
de bien
to
planifier l'économie nationale.
plan our
Nous vous
national economy
informons
well.
que
We'd like to
les
inform you
mécanismes
that our
nationaux de
national
lutte contre la
mechanism to tackle
corruption
corruption
et les
and
activités
related
connexes
activities
sont très
are
renforcés
very strong.
et que les actes de
And
corruption
acts
sont
of corruption
efficacement
are
combattus et les
tackled
citoyens en sont
effectively,
satisfaits.
and our citizens are satisfied with
Pour
this.
l'activité économique,
In terms of
le
economic
Burundi
activity,
est
Burundi is
sur
on
la
the
bonne
right
voie
track
en mettant à
by
profit ses ressources
leveraging its mineral
minières,
resources,
les voies de
its
transport
road,
routier, maritime
road, maritime,
et
and rail
ferroviaire
transport, or soon
aux
to be rail
opérateurs
transport.
économiques. Nous voudrions aussi
And we
informer
also
les
would like to
investisseurs
inform
que le littoral
investors
du lac
that the
Tanganyika
banks of the
est en train d'être
Tanganyika
aménagé
Lake is currently
pour
being developed to
développer le
support the
tourisme
growth of
et
tourism.
que d'autres nouveaux
And
sites
other new
touristiques
tourist
sont en
sites
train
are
d'être
also currently
aménagés
being
à
developed
l'intérieur
at the
du pays.
interior of the country.
Monsieur le Président,
President,
Mesdames,
ladies and
Messieurs,
gentlemen,
avant de terminer
before
mon
I
propos,
conclude,
je voudrais
I
encore
wish
une
to
fois
once again
réaffirmer
reaffirm
la
the
détermination de mon
determination of my
pays
country to
à continuer
continue
à entretenir de
to
bonnes relations
enjoy
diplomatiques
good
et de
diplomatic
coopération
relations
mutuellement
and
avantageuses,
win-win
gagnant-gagnant, avec tous
cooperation
les États
with all
et toutes
states
les
and all
organisations
international
internationales
organizations
dans le cadre de faire
as
face aux
we
défis fondamentaux qui nous menacent tous.
seek to tackle the
Nous nous
funding
réjouissons de la
challenges
reprise
that threaten us
de bonnes
all.
relations politiques,
We welcome the resumption
diplomatiques
of
et
good
économiques
political,
qui
diplomatic,
avaient
and
été
economic
gelées
relations which have been
avec
frozen
certains
with
États
certain
et
states and
organisations
international
internationales.
organizations.
Notre souhait
It is our
ardent
ardent
est
wish
d'entretenir
that we were
avec
able
les
to
pays et les
enjoy
organisations internationales
good,
de bonnes relations
strong
fortes
relations with
qui
countries and
contribuent
international
à un
organizations.
avenir
This will
radieux du
contribute
Burundi
to a bright
et
future for
de
Burundi
tous les pays
and for
du
all
monde.
countries around the
Je vous
world.
remercie de votre
Thank you
aimable
for your kind
attention. Que
attention,
Dieu vous
and God
bénisse.
bless
Merci.
you all.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Burundi for the statement just made and the request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Abdel Rahman al-Burhan, President of the Transitional Sovereign Council of the Republic of the Sudan. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Abdel Rahman al-Burhan, President of the Transitional Sovereign Council of the Republic of the Sudan, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of God, the
سيد
merciful and
الرئيس.
compassionate President,
السيدات والسادة أصحاب الجلالة
Your Majesties,
والفخامة والمعالي رؤساء الدول والحكومات ورؤساء الوفود
heads
سيد
of
الأمين
state
العام
and government,
الأمم
heads of
المتحدة
delegation, Secretary General of the United Nations,
السلام عليكم
ladies and
ورحمة
gentlemen,
الله وبركاته.
may the peace and compassion of God be with you.
يطيب لي أن أتقدم
At the
إليكم
outset, I
السيد تشابا التهنئة
pleased
الصادقة
to
على
extend to
انتخابكم
you, Mr. Chaba
رئيس للجمعية
Kurazi,
العامة
my warmest congratulations
المتحدة
on your election
بدورتها
to
السابعة
preside
والسبعين.
over the United
متمنين لكم
Nations General
التوفيق
Assembly at its 77th
والسداد.
session.
كما
I
نرغب
wish you every
عن
success in your
تقديرنا
work.
للجهود
I would
التي
like
بذلها
to
سلفكم
express my appreciation
سعادة
also to
الوزير
your predecessor,
عبد الله شاهد
Mr.
رئيس
Abdullah
الجمعية العامة
Shahid,
في دورتها الماضية.
who was president
سيد
of the
الرئيس،
76th session
نحن
of the United Nations General
نقدر
Assembly.
عاليا شعار الجمعية العامة
President,
لهذه الدورة
We welcome
نسمن
the theme of
مضامينه
this United Nations
ندعو
General Assembly
لمزيد
session,
من التضامن
and
الدولي
we call
والعمل
for
المشترك
more
متعدد الأطراف
cooperation,
وتفعيل آليات
joint
التعاون
action,
لإيجاد
multilateralism, and
حلول
also the
مستدامة
implementation of
للتحديات
cooperation
العالمية
mechanisms in order to
وتقليل
find
آثارها
sustainable solutions
السالبة
to
على
global
الشعوب
challenges, and in order
خاصة
to
في
reduce
الدول
the nefarious
الخالية من
repercussions of
نزاعات
people around the world,
وأقل البلدان
particularly on
نمواً.
countries who
السادة
have been affected
والسيدات،
by conflict and less
يسعدني
developed countries.
أن أشاطركم بالتطورات
Ladies and gentlemen,
السياسية في
I have the
السودان
pleasure to look
والتزامنا
over the most
بالعمل
recent
على
political
تحقيق
developments
السلام
in Sudan
عامل
to
عبر انتخابات
establish
عادلة
real
ونزيهة وشفافة
democracy that
بنهاية الفترة
includes
الانتقالية
fair, free
استشرافا
and transparent elections at the end of the
مدني
transition
لوصف كافة
period in order
السودانيين
to establish a
في إطار
civilian
ذلك
regime which
ولإتاحة
represents
الفرصة
all
كاملة
Sudanese people,
للحوار والتشاور.
and also
قررنا في
to
بيان للقوات
promote
المسلحة
national understanding
انسحاب المؤسسة
and to allow
العسكرية
civilians
من
to
الحوار
enter into dialogue
وعدم
and work
المشاركة في
together.
السلطة
We decided in
لإفساح
a
المجال
communique from the
أمام
armed
القوى
forces
السياسية
from the
والثورية
4th of July
المؤمنة بالتحول
2022 to
الديمقراطي
withdraw the
والمؤمنة
military institution
بأهداف
from this
ثورة
dialogue and to
الشعب
allow
العظيمة في
political,
ديسمبر
revolutionary political
لتشكل
forces to form
حكومة
a civilian
بقيادة
government.
مدنية من الكفاءات الوطنية يشارك فيها الجميع
This will be a
عدا حزب
government
المؤتمر الوطني
which will be
لإكمال
independent
مطلوبات
and
الفترة
will
الانتقالية.
implement the rest of
وهنا
remaining
نجدد
requests from the
التزامنا
transition period. Here,
بالتعاون
I
مع
wish
بعثة
to
الأمم
reiterate
المتحدة
our commitment
المتكاملة
to
لدعم المرحلة
cooperate
الانتقالية في السودان
with
وفقا لمبادئ
UNITAMS
ميثاق الأمم المتحدة
in line with the
وولايتها
United Nations
المنصوص
Charter
عليها
and
في
its
قرار
mandate
تشكيلها
set
ومصفوفة
forth by Security
مطلوبات دعم
Council
الانتقال
resolution
التي
and
سلمها
in
السودان
line with the
للأمم
list
المتحدة.
of requests
كما
presented
نجدد
by Sudan to the United Nations to
التأكيد
promote the
على
transition.
مواصلة التعاون مع قوة الأمم المتحدة
Cooperation will
الأمنية
continue
المؤقتة في أبيي.
with
أصحاب الفخامة
UNISFA.
والمعالي نؤكد أننا ننظر
Excellencies,
بإيجابية
ladies and gentlemen,
للمبادرات العديدة
we
التي تعمل
welcome
على
the
تحقيق
different
الوفاق الوطني في
initiatives
السودان، خاصة المبادرات
that
الوطنية
foster national
والتي تجري
understanding
بشأنها
in Sudan,
حوارات كثيفة
particularly national
تشارك فيها مختلف
initiatives
القوى
which are
المدنية
subject
من أحزاب
to
سياسية
rigorous
وقوى
debate
شبابية
where all civilian forces
وثورية
participate in too,
ومنظمات
i.e.
مجتمع
youth,
مدني
leaders
والجماعات
of
الموقعة
community leaders,
على اتفاق سلام جوبا آملين
civil society
أن تثمر
organizations and signatories to
توافق
the Juba Peace Agreement.
عريض يسهل
We
عملية
hope
الانتقال الديمقراطي
that this
ويفضي
process will
في
succeed
النهاية
and will
إلى إجراء
allow for a
انتخابات
democratic
نزيهة
transition
وشفافة.
to take place
سيد الرئيس، من أجل تحقيق الوفاق الوطني قدمنا
the
كافة أشكال
holding
الدعم
of free and
للآلية
transparent
الثلاثية
elections
التي تقودها بعثة يونيتامس
in order to
والاتحاد
promote
الأفريقي
national understanding. We
والهيئة القومية
have provided all the
للتنمية
necessary
إيجاد.
support to the
رغم ذلك-
tripartite mechanism
رغم ذلك
led by
الدعم استغرقت
UNITAMS, IGAD, and
هذه
African Union.
الآلية
However,
واستنزفت
this
وقتا ثمينا
mechanism has
دون أن
done a lot
تحقق
of work but has yet
المطلوب منها،
to conclude.
الأمر الذي عقد مسارات
And this
حوارات التوافق
made
الوطني.
debates
حضور
on
الكريم،
national
إن
consensus
جهودنا
more
بعد ثورة
complicated.
ديسمبر المجيدة
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks
قد
to
أثمرت
the
أيضاً
efforts that we have been
عن
making
توقيع
following the
اتفاقية
glorious
جوبا
December
للسلام
Revolution, we
والتي
signed the
خفضت
Juba Peace
وقلصت
Agreement.
النزاع في دارفور
This
وحققت الأمن
toned down the
والاستقرار
conflict
في
in
الإقليم.
Darfur
ومن هنا
and provided
نناشد الإخوة
stability and
عبد
security
العزيز
to the
الحلو
region.
وعبد
From
الواحد
this high
محمد نور
rostrum, we will call on our
للانضمام لرب
brothers
السلام
Abdel Aziz Al
والعمل مع
and
الجميع
Abdel Wahid Mohamed
لبناء
Noor
سودان المستقبل.
to
أيضاً
join the
يشهد
caravan
إقليم
of peace
دارفور
and to work
على
together
تحقيق
to
السلام
build a
والمصالحات
future of
المجتمعية، ازدياد معدلات
In
العودة
Darfur
الطوعية للنازحين إلى مناطقهم.
and following
وفي إطار حماية المدنيين في إقليم دارفور تكونت المجموعة الأولى من القوات المشتركة لتباشر عملها في حماية المدنيين. وهنا نناشد المجتمع الدولي بالعون والمساعدة في دفع جهود استحقاقات السلام بموجب اتفاق سلام جوبا. حضور الكريم، رغم التحديات الوطنية المعروفة التي تعمل بلادنا على تجاوزها، ظل السودان يلعب دورا إيجابيا بناء وداعما للسلام والاستقرار والتنمية في الإقليم من خلال دوره الفعال في تنفيذ اتفاقية السلام المنشطة في جنوب السودان، وكذلك التعاون مع الأشقاء في جمهورية الصومال. ولعب السودان دورا بالتنسيق مع الاتحاد الأفريقي للتوصل إلى اتفاقية السلام في جمهورية أفريقيا الوسطى الشقيقة، كما شارك السودان بفعالية في الاجتماعات المعنية بتعزيز السلام والأمن والتعاون في جمهورية الكونغو الديمقراطية. كما قاد السودان جهود تعزيز التنمية والتعاون بين الدول الأفريقية في القرن الأفريقي وشرق أفريقيا من خلال رئاسته لقمة الإيجاد. ويواصل السودان العمل المشترك مع الجارة الشقيقة تشاد لضبط الحدود، ويحرص السودان على التنسيق والمتابعة بين الأطراف المعنية بشأن استتباب الأمن في الجارة الشقيقة ليبيا. أيضا يبذل السودان جهدا كبيرا في مجال مكافحة الإرهاب والإتجار بالبشر مع الدول والمنظمات المعنية في هذا الصدد. كما ظل السودان يدعم باستمرار الشعوب لنيل حقوقها المشروعة التي تكفلها لها القوانين الدولية. سيد الرئيس، حضور الكريم، يبذل السودان جهودا حسيسة ومستمرة لتحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة بإيمانه العميق بالمرامي التي تضمنتها الوثيقة الختامية لأجندة التنمية المستدامة للعام 2030. في هذا الصدد اعتمدت حكومة الفترة الانتقالية الورقة الاستراتيجية للحد من الفقر للأعوام 21-23. وفي شهر يوليو من العام الماضي قدم السودان تقريره الطوعي للمرة الثانية. وبالطبع تتطلب هذه الجهود وقوف الأشقاء والأصدقاء وشركاء التنمية الدوليين مع السودان. ونؤكد من جديد التزامنا التام بتنفيذ خطة عام 2030 وخطة عمل أديس أبابا للتمويل من أجل تعاف أكثر مرونة واستدامة. سيدات والسادة، تقف الديون الخارجية حجر عثرة أمام بلادي، وتعد من جهودها مواصلة تحقيق التنمية الاقتصادية والاجتماعية عبر تنفيذ أهداف التنمية المستدامة. وكما تعلمون أن السودان كان قد تأهل للاستفادة من مبادرة الدول الفقيرة، فإننا نناشد المجتمع الدولي والدول الشقيقة والصديقة الوفاء بالتزاماتها وتعهداتها التي التزمت بها في اجتماعي باريس 2020 وبرلين 2021، علما أن السودان أكمل كافة التشريعات المطلوبة للاستفادة من إعفاء الديون. حضور الكريم، إن تصاعد الطاقة يتطلب مزيدا من التعاون الدولي. في هذا السياق نؤكد أن السودان مؤهل لتحقيق الأمن الغذائي مستوى المتخصصة والمنظمات للمساهمة في دعم جهود بلادي لتحقيق ذلك عبر نقل التكنولوجيا الزراعية وبناء القدرات ودعم مراكز البحوث الزراعية. سادة والسيدات، يستقبل السودان ملايين اللاجئين من الإخوة الأشقاء من مختلف أرجاء القارة عبر عقود من الزمن،
Ladies and
ويفتح
gentlemen,
لهم أبوابه
we've
ويتشارك
hosted
معهم
millions
موارده
of
القليلة
refugees
ويقدم الحماية
from
رغم
across the
الظروف الاقتصادية
continent.
المعلومة.
And for years
ومع
now,
تفاقم
we have had
آثار
our doors
التغييرات
open to
المناخية
refugees, and we have
والتناوب
shared
بين
our
موجات
limited
الجفاف
resources,
والفيضانات
and
ونقص
we
المساعدات الإنسانية.
provide them with
هنالك
protection.
واجب
And this is
جماعي
despite
لتقديم
economic
المساعدة
constraints that we're
ينبغي
all
القيام
experiencing.
به
The number
بقيادة
of
وكالات الأمم المتحدة
refugees is currently at 4
المعنية
million people.
والدول المانحة
But
والأشقاء
climate
والأصدقاء
change is
لعون
continuing,
ومساعدة المجتمعات
droughts and
التي تستضيف
floods
هؤلاء اللاجئين.
multiplying
إن
too,
الأمر
and
الذي يحتل
humanitarian
الأولوية
assistance
في
is
اهتمامات
falling.
السودان
This is why we'd
بمجال
like
نزع
to
السلاح
call our
هو
collective
موضوع
duty.
انتشار
We must
الأسلحة
act
الصغيرة
together
والخفيفة.
to provide
ويعاني
assistance to
السودان
refugees.
شأنه
Ladies and
شأن
gentlemen,
العديد من
there is
بلدان
another
العالم
priority
النامي
that
من
Sudan
هذه
has
الظاهرة
in
الخطيرة،
disarmament. It is the
حيث ارتبط
proliferation of
ذلك
small
في غالب
arms and light
الأحيان
weapons.
بأبعاد اجتماعية واقتصادية مما زاد من انتشاره
All
بين بعض
developing
القبائل
countries
والمجموعات السكانية.
is
الأمر
suffering from
الذي
this
يجعل
scourge. It is a
مهمة
scourge that
نزع
has
هذه
an
الأسلحة
economic and social
والسيطرة
dimension.
عليها عملا غاية في الصعوبة.
This scourge has
والسودان
been made
يدرك أكثر من
more
غيره
complicated by
مدى خطورة هذه
competition
الظاهرة
for
وضرورة
water,
استئصالها
pasture resources,
عبر
for mineral
تعاون
resources
إقليمي
too.
ودولي.
And this has
جمع الكريم
caused
أؤكد
these weapons
أن
to
السودان
proliferate
يتعاطى
further. Therefore, we need
مع
to be able to
موضوع إصلاح
control these
مجلس الأمن
weapons. Ladies and
في
gentlemen,
إطار الموقف الأفريقي
in
الموحد.
terms of
وينبني
Security
موقف
Council
السودان
reform,
من
we
عملية
support
التفاوض
the
الحكومي غير
Joint
الرسمي
African Common
حول
African Position.
الإصلاح على ضرورة
We
التأكيد على
participated
أهمية
in the
ومركزية موضوع إصلاح
informal
مجلس الأمن
intergovernmental negotiation
وضرورة
process on Security
أن
Council
يكون
reform.
الإصلاح
The Security Council
شاملا
must be
بحيث
reformed,
يخاطب
and this must
كذلك
be far-reaching reform
إجراءات
and should
وطرائق
include
ومناهج عمل
reform
مجلس
of
الأمن
the working
على نحو
methods of the Security Council
يعالج سلبيات
in
الممارسة
order to
والتجربة الراهنة
address the negative
للمجلس
effects
التي
of
برزت
practices.
في الصياغة الأحادية وهيمنة
For
حملة
example, we
الأقلام
have seen
على الدول.
the hegemony
ختاما
of pen
أرجو أن
holders
أتقدم بالشكر
over
والتقدير
some
كافة الدول
countries. Ladies and
الشقيقة
gentlemen,
والصديقة
in conclusion, I would
التي
like to
ظلت
thank all brotherly
عونا
friendly countries
وسندا
who stood
لبلادي
by our side
يضعف الظروف. وندعو الأمم المتحدة
at our
المجتمع
darkest
الدولي
times.
والأصدقاء
I would like to call on the
والأشقاء
international community,
لمزيد من
the UN,
التضامن
and our friends
مع بلادنا في
to
هذه
show
المرحلة.
more
شكرا
further solidarity
سيد
with
الرئيس.
Sudan.
السلام عليكم ورحمة
Thank you
الله
very
وبركاته.
much, President. May peace be with you.
On behalf of the Transitional Sovereign Council of the Republic of Sudan for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Yair Lapid, Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. In November 1947, this General Assembly gathered of a Jewish state. Only a few 100,000 Jews lived in Israel at the time, in hostile surroundings, shocked and devastated after the Holocaust, in which 75 years later, Israel is a strong, liberal democracy, proud and prosperous. The startup nation that invented Waze and Iron Dome, medicines for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and a robot which can perform spinal surgery. A world leader in water and food tech, cyber defense, and renewable energy, with 13 Nobel Prize winners in literature and chemistry, economics, and peace. How did this happen? It happened because we decided not to be a victim. We chose not to dwell on the pain of the past, but rather to focus on the hope of the future. A nation, into building a happy society, optimism. We are building the promised land. Understand history, respect it, and learn from it, but also to be willing and able to change it, to choose the future over the past, peace over war, partnership over seclusion and isolation. A few months ago, we convened the historic Negev Summit. We sat at dinner not far from the grave of David Ben-Gurion, the founding father of the State of Israel. There were 6 of us: the Secretary of State of the United States, foreign ministers of Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, a dinner that only 2 years ago no one would have believed was possible. And then the door opened, someone came in and said, but there was a terror attack not far from Tel Aviv. 2 Israelis were murdered. In an instant, we all understood that the goal of the attack was to destroy the summit. It was us to argue and to divide this new partnership between us. And I said to the foreign ministers, we have to condemn this terror attack right now together. We have to show them not triumph. The room fell silent. And then one of the Arab foreign ministers said, but this is why we're here. And 5 minutes later, we put out a joint statement from the 6 of us, condemning the attack and sanctifying life, cooperation, and our belief that there is a different way. The summit continued, agreements were signed, working groups were formed to deal with issues of technology, food security, energy, water, education, and infrastructure. Those working groups are changing the face of the world. Should look around and ask themselves, who is doing better? Those who chose the path of peace, or those who chose the way of war? Those who chose to invest in their people and country, or those who chose to invest in the destruction of others? Those who believe in education, tolerance, and technology, or those who believe in bigotry and violence? Whenever I meet someone who has criticism of Israel, I always have the same answer. Come and visit us. Come and meet the real Israel. You will fall in love. A country which combines breathtaking innovation with a deep sense of history, great people, great food, great spirit, a vibrant democracy, a country in which Jews, Muslims, and Christians live together with full civic equality. In the government which I lead, there are Arab ministers. There is an Arab party as a member of our coalition. We have Arab judges in our Supreme Court, Arab doctors saving lives in our hospitals. Israeli Arabs are not our enemies. They are our partners in life. Come and visit us. You will discover, from the white snowy mountains of the Golan to the white desert sand of the Negev, from Tel Aviv, the high-tech capital, a non-stop party on the Mediterranean Sea, to Jerusalem, our eternal capital, the holy city for three religions, in whose beautiful streets are, however, two major threats hanging over the head of our wonderful country, even though you may try to deny them. The first is the nuclear threat. The fear that terrorist states and terrorist organizations will get their hands on nuclear weapons. The second threat is the demise of truth. Our democracies are slowly being poisoned by lies and fake news. Reckless politicians, totalitarian states, and radical organizations are undermining our perception of reality. We should know there is no country in the world that faces this phenomenon more than Israel. There is no country that has come under a greater attack of lies with such a vast amount of money and effort being invested in spreading disinformation about it. Last May, the picture of Malak Al-Tanani, a 3-year-old Palestinian girl, was published all over the world with the terrible news that she was killed with her parents in an attack by the Israeli Air Force. It was a heartbreaking image. But Malak Al-Tanani doesn't exist. The photo was taken from Instagram. It is of a girl from Russia. I can give you thousands more examples of similar fake news about Israel. The anti-Israel movement has been spreading these lies for years in the media, on college campuses. The question is not why they do it. To people who have invested billions, why do you side with Islamic extremists who hang gay people from cranes, oppress women, and fire rockets at civilians from kindergartens and hospitals? I am not a guest in this building. Israel is a proud sovereign nation and an equal member of the United Nations. We will not be silent when those who wish to harm us use this. Anti-Semitism is the willingness to believe the worst about the Jews without questioning. Anti-Semitism is judging Israel by a different standard than any other country. Conducting this orchestra of hate is Iran. For more than 40 years now, in the town squares and on the streets of Iran, demonstrators have been photographed burning Israeli and American flags. Ask yourselves, where are the flags coming from? How did they get so many of our flags? The answer is they are manufacturing them especially, just so they can burn them. This is what an industry of hate looks like. This is a regime that systematically deals with hatred. They even hate their own people. Young Iranians are suffering and struggling from the shackles of Iran's regime, and the world is silent. They cry for help in social media. They pay for the desire to live a life of freedom with their lives. Iran's regime hates Jews, hates women, hates gay people, and Mahsa Amini. Their hate is a way of life. It is a way to preserve the oppressive rule. There is only one member state in the UN that openly states it wished to destroy another member state. Iran has declared time and time again that it is interested in the total destruction of the state of Israel. And this building is silent. What are you afraid of? Has there ever been a time in human history where silence stopped violence? The country that wants to destroy us is also the country that founded the largest terrorist organization in the world, Hezbollah. Iran funds Hamas and Islamic Jihad and it is behind mass terrorist attacks from Bulgaria to Buenos Aires. It is a murderous dictatorship that is making every effort to get a nuclear weapon. If the Iranian regime gets a nuclear weapon, they will use it. The only way to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is to put a credible military threat on the table. And then, and only then, to negotiate a longer and stronger deal with them. It needs to be made clear to Iran that if it advances its nuclear program, the world will not respond with words, but with military force. Every time a threat like that was put on the table in the past, choosing the easy option. It chooses not to believe the worst, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Israel does not have this privilege. This time, we are not standing empty-handed against those who want to destroy us. The Jews today have a state. We have an army. We have great friendships, first and foremost with the United States. We have capabilities, and we are not afraid to use them. We will do whatever it takes. Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. We will not stand by while there are those who try to kill us. Not again. Never again. Israel's economic and military strength allows us to protect ourselves, but it also allows us something else. To strive for peace with the entire Arab world and with our closest neighbors, the Palestinians. An agreement with the Palestinians based on the 2 states for 2 people is the right thing for Israel's security, for Israel's economy, and for the future of our children. Peace is not a compromise. It is the most courageous decision we can make. Peace is not weakness. It embodies within it the entire might of human spirit. War is a surrender to all that is bad within us. Peace is the victory of all that is good. Despite all the obstacles, stay. I am one of them. We have only one condition: that the future Palestinian state will be a peaceful one, that it will not become another terror base from which to threaten the well-being and the very existence of Israel, that we will have the ability to protect the security of all the citizens of Israel at all times. If someone believes that demand is too much, then look at the neighborhood in which we live. Look at Lebanon, a collapsing state controlled by Hezbollah. At Syria, where a murderous regime massacred 500,000 of its own people. Look at Afghanistan, at Libya, at Iran. You can ask us to live according to the values in the UN Charter, but you cannot ask us to die for them. My father was a child in the ghetto. My grandfather was murdered in a concentration camp. We want to live in peace, but only if it gives us security. Look at Gaza. Israel did everything the world asked of us, including from this very stage. We left 17 years ago. We dismantled the settlements, took apart our military bases. There is not a single Israeli soldier in Gaza. We even left them 3,000 greenhouses so they could start to build an economy for themselves. What did they do in response? In less than a year, the greenhouses and replaced them with terrorist training camps and rocket launch sites. Since we left Gaza, over 20,000 rockets and missiles have been fired at Israel. All of them at civilians, all of them at our children. I have a child with special needs. Her name is Yaeli. She's autistic. She doesn't speak. In May last year, I had to wake her at 3 o'clock in the morning and run down with her to the bomb shelter because missiles were exploding above our home. All those who preach about the importance of peace are welcome to try running to a bomb shelter at 3 a.m. with a girl who does not speak, to explain to her without words why there are those who want to kill her. In this building, we've been asked more than once why we do not lift the restrictions on Gaza. We are ready to do that tomorrow morning. We are ready to do more than that. I say from here to the people of Gaza, we are ready to help you build a better life, build an economy. We presented a comprehensive plan to help rebuild Gaza. We only have one condition: stop firing rockets and missiles at our children. Put down your weapons. There will be no restrictions. Put down your weapons, bring home our children who are being held in captivity. Hadar and Doron, may their memory be a blessing. Avera and Isham, who are still alive. And we will build your economy together. We can build your future together, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. Put the Palestinian state you want to create. Put down your weapons, and there will be peace. That is the minimum I owe my grandfather, my father, and my daughter. The Jewish people have learned the lessons of the past. Our security is guaranteed by our military might, our economic ingenuity, our democratic resilience. Israel seeks peace with all our neighbors, all our neighbors. We are not going anywhere. The Middle East is our home. We are here to stay forever. And we call upon every Muslim country from Saudi Arabia to Indonesia to recognize that and to come talk to us. Our hand is outstretched. Conflicts do not disappear on their own. Hostility doesn't disappear on its own. People create conflicts. People can also replace them with friendship, kindness, and common good. The burden of proof is not on us. We have already proved our desire for peace. Our peace treaty with Egypt has been fully implemented for 43 years now. Our peace treaty with Jordan for 28 years. We are a country that keeps its word and fulfills agreements. And the agreements we've signed with the Arab world. In the book of Numbers, there's the verse that every Jew is familiar with. Isa Hashem panav elecha ve'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord raise his countenance toward you and grant you peace. The state of Israel is the only country in the world founded by a book, the book of books, the Tanakh. That book and the principles of liberal democracy require us to stretch out our hand in peace. And very, very careful. That is how we've made peace in the past. That is how we will make peace in the future. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency James Marape, Prime Minister of the Independent State of Papua New Guinea. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure. I invite him to address the Assembly.
His Excellency, Mr. Saba Korosi, the President of our General Assembly, His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished fellow heads of government and heads of state, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to again join and address this August hall. On my government and people's behalf, I congratulate you, Mr. President, of the General Assembly's work and wish you all the very best. Mr. President, your presidency's theme of an integrated agenda for peace and prosperity and sustainability through multilateralism is most needed today. We must build on the good foundations laid by your predecessors and all of us going forward. This is given the turmoil, uncertainty, mistrust, pain, suffering from multiple crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the worsening climate crisis, the escalating social economic challenges, and conflicts that are tearing us apart. Let us transform words be underpinned by our collective commitments, supportive resources that are affordable, accessible, people's basic needs, restore their trust and confidence in all our governments, heal our lands and ecosystems to deliver the future we want as envisioned, and many of our own
development aspirations. Mr. President, let me pay tribute to your predecessor, fellow small island developing state representative, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Sansi of Hope, that has renewed our collective resolve to turn the tide against the ravages of the pandemic and other evolving challenges. We wish him all the very best. May I also convey my delegation's gratitude to Mr. Secretary General for his strong and provide a future that is much better, safer, and secure for all, including, most importantly, our succeeding generations. The candid yet sobering report presented by the Secretary General to us at this meeting on the state of our world today is deeply troubling. The clarion call from the Secretary General must not go unheeded. We must all do our part and act decisively now for our collective good. Otherwise, the alternative is to condemn ourselves to a future of doom and gloom. Is that what our children deserve? It is with this in mind that Papua New Guinea is supportive of the Secretary General's narrative of our common agenda. We welcome the preliminary progress made to better understand the range of defining issues and how we address this effectively to help deliver on protecting common environment for the better tomorrow. To this end, we applaud the Secretary General for convening the Transforming Education Summit. We are pleased to note the shared recognition of education as a cornerstone for a prosperous, stable, and secure future for all. I know that an educated society is an informed society that stands to make better decisions. For my country, Mr. President, education is a key priority and is guided by our education policy of leaving no child behind, supported by our education sector's development plan 2023 to 2027. It is a holistic and inclusive approach in ensuring focus on quality, lifelong education for all, with special attention given to the most vulnerable and marginalized. A demonstration of this strong commitment for education is my government's decision to provide free education for all up to grade 12 and beyond into tertiary educations, and also providing opportunities to children, youth, and adults through flexible, open, and distant education, and community colleges to upskill their capacity to be entrepreneurs and nation builders. Mr. President, we also welcome the consensus to reach the summit of the future to find solutions to the multiple crises we are now facing on planet Earth. This would, however, be not defined by the lowest common denominator, but in my view, it must be rather more ambitious, at the same time realistic and workable. We remain committed to engage in national efforts to attain our national vision 2050. From this assembly that the COVID-19 pandemic and every other stresses that we face as a nation, including the supply chain difficulties and development finance challenges affecting my country, has spurred my government to embark on our own similar national process to the Secretary General's global efforts under our common agenda. This is where we have taken stock of our own domestic development challenges, and we have set in place key policies and legislative measures, including reforms in important sectors and our development priorities, tying them to a budget cycle under what we call the medium-term development plan. As envisioned by our own nation's Vision 2050 aspirations. Mr. President, I report to the United Nations that the core focuses of my government for the next 5 years, because we've recently concluded democratic election process, will be to build a resilient and diversified economy, invest in high-quality economic and social infrastructures, ensure fair and equitable natural resources development, address business and investment confidences, strengthening the rule of law and domestic security, deliver quality education and health to all our people, and lastly but not the least, strengthening the institutions of state, including governance on key issues like corruption and everything that is fundamental to developing nations. And sustainable development as proposed by yourself. As Papua New Guinea approaches our 50th independence anniversary in 3 years' time, my government is also prioritizing industrializing our economy through import substitution, value adding, and downstream processing of our vast natural resources with the use of modern, clean, green technology that will not compromise my country's rich biodiversity and our pristine natural environment. For it is believed, Papua New Guinea, and it is documented rather, Papua New Guinea has about 5 to 6% of world's biodiversity, and our huge tropical rainforest, third only behind Congo and Amazon areas of our planet. We therefore welcome genuine and appropriate foreign investors to join us in partnership in various sectors. Investments. Mr. President, while we note the global community's call for domestic revenue sources to be expanded and better harnessed for development financing, we also recognize that the existing global economic and financial architecture is weighed against developing countries like myself or Papua New Guinea. This structure needs to be changed to the better so that it supports all developing nations in their development needs. Lest we forget, and I say lest we forget, many times small developing countries get to bear the brunt of global economic and social wars that they have no hand in engendering those global issues. It is in the interest of a fellow small island developing state for the development financing needs to be considered by taking rather than the gross national income measure alone, which is no longer the international community to support the proposed SID as multi-vulnerability index as a tool to support small island developing states' concessional financing and debt relief, given their special circumstances amidst the ongoing and increasing challenges they continue to face in as far as their development needs are concerned, including food securities that our good General Secretary alluded to. Mr. President, today in many parts of the world, we're facing food security as you alluded to. Hunger and poverty can be something that Papua New Guinea can assist, contribute to alleviating in as far as our global contribution is concerned. Papua New Guinea's 8 million people live Our country has rain and water with abundance of sea equally as a food source. We are presently supplying, for instance, tuna to Asia and Europe. Comparing, for instance, United Kingdom of Great Britain has only 243,610 square kilometers. Japan has 377,975 square kilometers. Or our neighbor, Philippines, has only 300,000 square kilometers of land. Papua New Guinea has enough land, sea, and people to be a food supplier to the world, Mr. Secretary General, in response to your concerns for global food security. For the first time in our country, my government has inserted efforts to address this imminent problem by placing more emphasis on the agricultural sector. This is viewed not only as a revenue source, introduction of innovative farming methods in cash crop production, livestock, and poultry, and to take ownership and leadership of their development needs and livelihoods, and at the same time also foster poverty, alleviation, and food security. It is from this perspective that we have established new ministerial portfolios for oil palm, for coffee, not only for the needs of majority of our rural communities and the local economies to be integrated into the national and global markets, but to also to improve their lives and livelihood, to be a source for food security and hunger and poverty alleviation for our own country, as well as export to other countries. We therefore welcome, particularly in the downstream processing of products that adds value and supports local for COP27. Despite the rallying efforts of global communities, including pledges under the Paris Agreement to cut emissions, fire, Mr. President. This is further compounded by destructive floods and rising sea levels. And let me pass Papua New Guinea's sympathies to the victims of the flood in Pakistan. Communities include displacement of many and loss of identity as a people, and in my own country and across the Pacific region and beyond, the carbon emission level continues to cause destruction, and the destructive spiral is getting out of control. We cannot and must not allow this. My country, as one of the rainforests of the world, is one of the few, if I could repeat, one of the few carbon positive countries of the world. We remove more carbon than we emit. Over the past 5 years or so, we have reduced our national forest emission by 53%. This totals over 75 million tons of United Nations verified REED plus credits that will be on the market by the end of this year. My government has adopted our Climate Management Act, and this year we have set in place our nationally determined contribution regulation. We have also endorsed our nationally determined contributions implementation plan and the NDC electricity roadmap and the agriculture, forestry, and other land use NCD roadmaps. We are also drafting our first electric vehicle policy and plan. It is, however, despite small countries like Papua New Guinea who don't have many or big carbon footprints, it is, however, disheartening to note that despite our proactive national efforts to implement our Paris Agreement commitment, we seem to be getting the raw end of the deal all the time. We have done our part. We have had little support from the global north, including our submissions to the Green Climate Fund. Were almost forgotten in the Glasgow conversations. We cannot be placated by toothless pledges anymore. We need the power of sovereign carbon markets that fully comply with the Paris Agreement. The world cannot talk about climate change without talking about forest conservation and proper land use management. Papua New Guinea is calling now for an urgent global focus on conservation, preservation, and sustainability of our global forests with proper land use practices, because only in our DA3s of the forests that you find the dual benefit of carbon cleansing and oxygen production. Excellencies, where his views shared with me on forests is the same as I am mentioning here today, and that the world, especially those whose carbon footprints of a Mother Earth is the greatest, must help preserve the forests of the earth that commensurates their levels of emissions. This is incumbent upon all nations. We must preserve our forests. It is Papua New Guinea's humble view that the atmospheric balance of oxygen and carbon should be ranked the #1 focus of all mankind, because therein lies the sustenance of life, and the DA3s of our forests plays this balancing act as created by Creator God. The world must save our forests, because to Not to do so is suicidal, and is suicidal for the Earth's future. We are living sake. This must be corrected. Let us not forget those forests then held in the known coal, oil, and gas reserves. In short, if we lose our rainforests, climate stability is impossible. We may as well kiss the temperature goal of 1.5 degrees goodbye. We and the other rainforest nations are trying our best to balance forest harvest for our development needs, at the same time conserving for the world need. We need help here. You have to hear us. Our planet is fragile. Time is short. Together we can do it. For not to do so is to the detriment of planet Earth. And on my final opportunities, I would also like to echo Papua New Guinea's strong advisory opinion on the existential threat and welcome others to join the Pacific and Caribbean and other partners to take this forward in this General Assembly for our common good. On the ocean agenda, Mr. President, I would reaffirm that Papua New Guinea as a maritime nation is strongly committed to ensuring our maritime zones remain safe, secure, and peaceful and on the law of the seas. It not only provides us economic opportunities, I beg your pardon, but also includes through our fisheries resources, but also symbolizes in many centuries. Like other small island developing states and least developed countries, Papua New Guinea calls on developed nations to assist us access appropriate capacity building resources, research, science, and technology based economy. We therefore welcome public-private partnership. The success of the second Ocean Conference. Mr. President, we also encouraged by the welcome offer by France and Costa Rica to be the next co-host of the conference and look forward to working with like-minded countries to take forward this initiative. Such partnerships on the ocean agenda is most welcome. Mr. President, I would like to also applaud the sterling efforts under the leadership and presidency of Singapore for last month's negotiation related to the new implementing instrument on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. As a marine nation, we offer our fullest support. Mr. President, of empowering youth and as a real partner for national development. This is indeed long overdue, must be brought to fruition without further delay. In recognition of the ever-increasing youth bulge in my country and the challenges they continue to face under my government, and have brought youth issues to the forefront and center of our nation building. We are rolling out currency programs as a tool for capacity building and training that will equip them to be owners, drivers, and build our nation. And we are also using our education system as a lever to foster integral human development for all our youths. And we welcome development partners to join us in these transformative endeavors. Mr. President, it is to be a main sponsor and strong supporter of the establishment of a issue. Whilst we recognize that much work remains to be done, however, once operationalized, we our national efforts on the youth agenda. The potential of our youth, as well as recognition by Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, the United Nations Deputy Secretary General, and the Youth Special Envoy during their groundbreaking visit to my country in March 2020, is a testament to this partnership. Mr. President, on gender equality and empowerment, including combating gender-based violence, this remains a top priority for my government. We have established a bipartisan Parliamentary Committee that has done extensive public consultations and the recommend in a serious way to address the protection of our women and girls and give them fair and just opportunities to reach all their full potentials. We've also combat gender-based violences. Additionally, we are pleased to have two well-qualified women elected into Parliament in our recently concluded election for 11th Parliament, an improvement from our last Parliament where there were no women in Parliament. I've also recognized their capabilities and their professionalism, and we have tasked them with certain responsibilities for our country. We will continue to work hard to have more women representatives in decision-making bodies as equal development partners. Mr. President, I would like to join the call for global peace and stability. The simmering tensions and mistrust, which are the nemesis of peace, cannot and must not be allowed to fester anymore. We, as members of this United Nations, took it upon ourselves to uphold the Charter of the United Nations. It is therefore incumbent upon all of us to ensure that we are seen to uphold the commitments of the United Nations Charter. In our context of peace, the Bougainville peace process is continuing, and I want to assure this August forum, I want to assure United Nations in this meeting that this important issue remains our top priority in Papua New Guinea. Peace by peaceful means I'd like to say we are on a road to having a political solution settled for Bougainville. We have a roadmap that continues to serve as a blueprint, and we will consider all issues under the existing parameters of our constitution for life acceptable to all Papua New Guineans in as far as Bougainville is concerned. We would like to place our big thank you to the United Nations for their role in Papua New Guinea and the Melanesian conflict resolution that they have come to know can be replicated in political conflicts are concerned. On the reforms of the Security Council, Mr. President, to make it relevant, and we note the incremental progress that continues to be made into intergovernmental processes. However, let me again reiterate our call to expedite the long drawn-out process by ensuring that we have a negating document that can serve as a basis for all of us to go forward. May I also take this opportunity to recognize the milestone achievement. Earlier this year, the General Assembly held the members of the Security Council responsible for the decisions regarding peace and security. This is welcomed, and we support the emergence under the General Assembly with respect to the situation in Ukraine and to ensure the Security Council is really accountable for all their actions. The success that arose from this process is a small but nonetheless significant step to why the reform of the Security Council. Closing and not the least, Mr. President, may I take this opportunity to pay homage to the memory of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who, by the grace of God and Lord Jesus, was Papua New Guinea's head of state for the last 47 years. Our beloved Queen personified grace, dignity, honesty, humility, tolerance of others, forgiveness, and all the other Christian virtues, and lived 70 years of consistent, unfailing life of public service of the world today must learn to practice. And I, and on behalf of my Papua New Guinea in peace with the Maker Jesus, and we say our heartfelt sympathies and condolences to His Majesty King Charles III and his royal family and the people, the government of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth family. Let me conclude by thanking you, Mr. President, for giving me this opportunity to speak again on a global need, and I thank the United Nations for one more time being a wonderful host. In fact, our milestone 77th session. May God bless the United Nations of the world. And I thank you all for listening. Thank you, Mr. President.
On behalf of the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Irakli Garibashvili, Prime Minister of Georgia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Irakli Garibashvili, Prime Minister of Georgia. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Georgian people, it is an honor to speak to you again at the United Nations General Assembly. And the progress we have made as an international community since the creation of the United Nations. At the first session in 1946, the founders voted to unite to maintain global peace and security. While we have made significant advances, we must acknowledge this body, the very same types of acts that led to the establishment of the United Nations after World War II. In 2008, my country, Georgia, resulted in the ongoing occupation of 20% of our territory. At the time, the international community recognized this aggression. But as we have learned, the world's democracies must act as founded to save succeeding generations from the scourge of. It is our duty, it is our promise. Today, I have the privilege of representing Georgia, a strong, proud, freedom-loving nation that has preserved its sacred heritage and history while also evolving and adapting to the geopolitical realities of the 21st century. 30 years ago, Georgia became part of the United Nations family, for shared values in our region and worldwide. We seek all opportunities for collaboration with our international partners to advance the cause of peace. In that regard, the implementation of the EU-mediated 2008 ceasefire agreement, support for its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Though my country is 20% still occupied by Russia, we do not let this difficult challenge define us. We continue to punch above our weight and contribute to the international community. Since our government came to power in 2012, we have implemented an ambitious reform agenda that brought us closer to our key international partners. The European Union, United States, NATO. For the first time since we regained independence, Georgia stability. We are continuously working on Georgia's global positioning and are already realizing the rewards. Georgia is first in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. The Open Budget Index ranked Georgia as first in the world in terms of budget transparency. And according to the Fraser Institute Economic Forum, the top 5 economies, along with Singapore and Switzerland, Numbeo named Georgia one of the world's safest countries with the United States and Europe, goes hand in hand with our commitment to continue democratic transformation. Increased Euro-Atlantic and European integration is our way of returning to the family of European nations, with whom we share history, culture, and most importantly, values. European and Euro-Atlantic integration. And our commitment to these goals is backed up by actions and real results, including the Association Agreement, DCFTA, and visa-free travel with the European Union. This year, we applied for full EU membership. And exceed those benchmarks. The prospect of acceding to the EU is a strong motivation for our country and our citizens. We are fully aware that European perspective comes with a responsibility of the highest political, economic, and legal convergence with the European Union. Council's decision by presenting a very concrete action plan to address the EU's 12 priorities. This inclusive process ensures full engagement. The working groups have been established in Parliament for each priority area. We're making progress and are well ahead of schedule. Let me be clear. Georgia deserves EU candidate status, which will bring us a reality. We have developed a long-term development strategy, Vision 2030, a nationwide policy document that covers key directives and priorities of our general development by 2030. The country now has a new years 2022-2030. The government approved this strategy following discussions with both international partners and domestic civil society organizations. And this strategy aims to further improve human rights protection standards and is in line with the UN Sustainable Development. The massive document covers all fundamental human rights and freedoms. We are working now with the world's leading firms and brightest minds to the services sector is globally recognized. And now we are injecting additional investments in the education and healthcare sectors. The startup ecosystem is thriving. Logistics and energy potential are now realized. Collectively, this created a sustainable end for Georgia and its people. Our government's sound policies led to a strong recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, with strong economic growth reaching 10.4% last year in 2021. Our growth projections are up to 9% for this year, primarily due to our government's proactive measures to minimize the impacts of a post-COVID recovery and the war in Ukraine. We are creating opportunities and give it all the necessary, including those living in Georgia's occupied territories. For that reason, here today at the United Nations General Assembly, I want to speak directly to my Abkhaz and Ossetian brothers and sisters, and once again tell them and peacefully European state. War is waging again, not far from the doorstep of my country. Russia's full-fledged war in Ukraine undermines Ukraine, as well as the UN Charter and fundamental principles of international law. Georgia stands with Ukraine. Since the start of the war, my government has provided substantial humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, including the allocation of more than 1,000 and accommodation for Ukrainians currently residing in my country. The Georgian education system has enrolled more than 1,500 Ukrainian students, many of whom receive general education in the Ukrainian language according to the standard Ukrainian curriculum. We have 400 resolution statements, joint statements, and other initiatives made or proposed by all major international organization institutions in support of Ukraine, including being a main as confirmed by the US State Department's report of Georgia and Georgian financial institutions act fully in accordance with the financial sanctions imposed by the United States and others on the Russian Federation. We have aligned with the restrictive measures of the EU against Crimea and Sevastopol since 2014, and this year with the restrictive measures on Donetsk and Luhansk. As the conflict in Ukraine has shown, the wider Black Sea security is at the forefront of the Euro-Atlantic security agenda. And Georgia, as an indivisible part of the As we know well, security brings stability. Predictability is a crucial precondition for sustainable economic development. Therefore, the more predictable the Black Sea region becomes, the more we can unlock its economic potential for the benefit of our people and the global economy. For that reason, we are developing strategic transport corridors connecting Asia with Europe. Georgia participates in several international initiatives and infrastructure projects with our European colleagues. Despite the complex situation in our region, we spare no effort to foster rapprochement between our neighbors. We have already had success stories, including the safe return of 15 Armenian detainees to their homeland in exchange for maps of mine territories to Azerbaijan. And this July, for the first time, the foreign ministers of Azerbaijan and Armenia met in Tbilisi, Georgia. We are ready to serve as a venue for this dialogue to bring much needed peace and stability to our region. And with this in mind, Georgia has been promoting Caucasus. This new initiative, dear friends, is not substituting, countering, or opposing any other cooperation formats. Georgia serves as an honest broker to aid in normalizing regional relations. We're also heavily investing in our country's infrastructure to increase Georgian transit capabilities for the benefit of the region. We aim to attract greater institutional foreign investment, facilitate projects of regional importance, and strengthen our infrastructural capabilities, thus becoming an actual bridge between East and West. And our goal is we are already discussing with our EU counterparts a list of flagship projects which will bring additional economic synergies and serve as catalyst for more connectivity and integration with the European Union and European markets. We believe all countries of the South Caucasus and allies from the West will benefit from this collaboration. We must act now to secure the Black Sea, protect energy routes, maintain supply chains, and increase regional connectivity to foster greater economic development. These are all essential challenges are happening against a backdrop of global challenges, such as international security, the pandemic, and climate change. Georgia contributes to global peace and the rules-based international order. For over 2 decades, Georgia has contributed to NATO missions around the world, serving as one of the largest per capita contributors to the mission in Afghanistan. And we lost many brave soldiers. Hundreds were wounded in these missions and suffered in protecting common security while continuing to support the EU-led missions. Dear friends, as I speak here today, dangers are threatening all of humanity that we can no longer ignore. The planetary crisis created by climate change, from biodiversity loss to pollution, represent an existential threat. And like many challenges, it affects developing nations first, hindering the ability to realize sustainable development goals. In Georgia, our government has made significant investments in education, public health, and the environment to ensure that future generations prosperous and productive societies. Education in the 21st century means investing in digital literacy and promoting infrastructure to bridge the digital divide to ensure that future crises, whether public health, war, or climate related, do not create dire situations. In conclusion, I believe that working together, we will return peace and prosperity to our homes and countries. This is the spirit and the mandate vested in the United Nations from its founding, to support and ensure decades of restored independence. Georgian dreams are becoming a reality. In recent decades, our nation, whose history traces back thousands of years, has become an example of resilience and progress in the face of extraordinary challenges. With our international partners, I am confident that we will build a brighter, more peaceful now and for the generations that will follow us. Thank you very much.
Of Georgia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Jonas Gahr Støre, Prime Minister of Norway. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Jonas Gahr Støre, Prime Minister of Norway. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and indeed. As a global community, we face dire consequences from war, climate change, the pandemic. The Secretary General underlined this eloquently in his address on Tuesday. We have the values and principles necessary to deal with these challenges. They are enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. No country is unfazed by these challenges, and we can only successfully respond to them together. And this is precisely why to raise above narrow self-interest and find common ground. This is what we need to turn to again. Order. But now this rule-based order is under attack. February 2022 ushered in what we hoped we would never witness again, a new large-scale war in Europe. Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine has led to massive suffering, Russia bears sole responsibility for the war and its consequences, and Russia is responsible for bringing it to an end. Mr. President, Russia's actions are in blatant breach of the UN Charter and therefore also having devastating global consequences, as we've heard so many speakers highlight this week. It has undermined multilateral cooperation when we need it the most. It has accelerated a negative economic spiral and jeopardized the 2030 agenda. We are all feeling the repercussions of the war. Has increased dramatically. Ordinary people across the globe, not least people in developing countries, are paying the price. And the war is amplifying other crises and compounding the impacts of climate change and armed conflict in other parts of the world. The Horn of Africa is faced with its worst drought in more than 4 decades. Pakistan is contending with devastating floods. More than 300 million people affected by conflicts and humanitarian crises are in need of humanitarian assistance and protection. A few years ago, it appeared that hunger would soon be a scourge of the fast. Now, food insecurity is on the rise. And no continent is more vulnerable to the combined effects of climate change, conflicts, and growing food insecurity than Africa. Let me say this: Norway stands in solidarity with the people grappling with these interlocking crises. We have allocated more funding to humanitarian assistance and development. Aggression against Ukraine is a challenge to the norms and the foundation. We are standing up to confront that challenge. Some hold the conviction that authoritarian regimes are strong, while democracies are frail and likely to crack under pressure. We are proving them wrong. As partners, we are standing with Ukraine and aid its self-defense. As Europe's largest supplier, standing up for human rights and fundamental freedoms elsewhere. Norway will continue to promote civic space, protect human rights defenders, and support media diversity and independent journalism worldwide. Women's and girls' participation in society and their right to decide over their own bodies are essential for democratic and sustainable development, not least in times of conflict and war. Safeguarding these human rights remains one of our top priorities. And while diplomacy and peace-building efforts in major conflicts across the globe. As part of our long-standing engagement in the Middle East, we are pushing for an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, including a viable two-state solution. In Colombia, the new government has expressed its commitment to implementing the peace agreement with the FARC and initiating formal negotiations with the ELN guerrilla group. The ELN also seems inclined to renew that dialogue. And as a guarantor country, Norway remains committed to Colombia's quest for peace where Norway is engaged. We promote active involvement and participation by women in line with the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We talk to all parties as we work to achieve peaceful conflict resolution. And without dialogue, we have no opportunity to influence the parties and encourage them to move in a more positive direction. Norway also strongly supports the good offices of the Secretary General in conflicts worldwide. We commend him for his dedicated team for their important work on the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and Turkey for its important contribution. For the war in Ukraine, but the war has dramatically exacerbated this situation. So if the global community does not act swiftly, the current food crisis will develop into a food availability and a food supply crisis, and that is too serious. Together with fighting climate change, Norway has placed food security at the top of its development agenda. This year, we are allocating more than $300 million in funding for food security initiatives alone. We need to increase humanitarian assistance and enhance social safety nets, promote local food productions in the global south, accelerate transformation to climate resilient and sustainable food system. In all of this, we must ensure that the needs of women and girls are adequately integrated. We are all dependent on a collective response if we are to succeed in addressing climate change and the loss of biodiversity. Currently, we are not on track, and this speed needs to change. Norway will honor its commitment to cut greenhouse gas emissions and to play a key role in the green transition. We have listened to the concerns of developing countries, and we have decided to double our climate finance to these countries by 2026. Within this climate change affects millions of people worldwide. The current humanitarian system will not be able to meet the increasing humanitarian needs. And as global warming continues, weather and climate extremes will increasingly have an impact on armed conflict. So, Mr. President, climate and security are already closely interlinked. The fight against climate change requires new, innovative approaches. And we must do what we can to make the upcoming COP27 in Egypt a success, and Norway will not rest one day before that summit. Innovative approach trying to accelerate development. As co-chair, Norway will work with partners across the global south to support initiation of renewable energy transitions, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase clean power, and create green jobs. And then, Mr. President, with our geography and our history, the oceans can and will be a vital part of the solution to climate change, food insecurity, and poverty. If adequately managed and protected, the oceans hold the key to reaching many of the Sustainable Development Goals. But Sustainable Development Goal number 14 is the most for a sustainable ocean economy is co-chaired by Norway. It's an initiative by world leaders committed to ocean health and ocean wealth in support of the 2030 Agenda. The panel members have committed to sustainably manage 100% of the ocean areas under their national jurisdiction. We will establish sustainable ocean plans and urge other coastal states to do the same. Mr. President, the fifth session of the UN's Environmental Assembly was an important breakthrough for multi-cooperation on environmental issues. Norway will work to ensure an effective agreement on combating plastic pollution through a life cycle approach. Pandemic is not over yet. We cannot go from COVID-19 panic to COVID-19 neglect. We must use the lessons learned from COVID-19 and the ACT Accelerator. This will be key to preventing, preparing, and responding to new outbreaks of infectious disease. Mr. President, Russia's unlawful act of aggression against Ukraine heightened geopolitical tensions and posed obstacles to multilateral cooperation. That is serious. As a Security Council member, Norway has consistently sought to strengthen the Council mandate to maintain international peace and security. And despite increased geopolitical tensions, the Security Council has retained mandate for the UN in Afghanistan. Together with Niger, we negotiated the groundbreaking resolution on the protection of education in armed conflict. And we partnered with Ghana on the resolution of maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. All this matters, Mr. President. And in times of crisis and rising global tensions, we all feel the pressure to put domestic concerns before global solidarity. In times of distress, it is only natural for political leaders to try to look after their own populations. It is their responsibility. But let us remind ourselves that there is no contradiction between this and engaging with the rest of the world. On each other, and we have a shared destiny. And this is clear to me. Without a strong and effective UN, the international community will not be able to address the challenges we face. That is why we applaud and support the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report. If anything, it is than when it was launched. The Summit of the Future in September 2024 will be an important milestone. We expect and will work towards an ambitious declaration on future generations. Ahead. Mr. President, let me thank you. We are living in challenging time, but let us never lose hope and recall the strength we can muster when we act together. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of Norway for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister, Minister of Barbados. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. I have great pleasure. Motley, Prime Minister, Minister of National Security and the Public Service, and Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. I invite her to address the Assembly.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Honorable Assembly, as its President. And as I do so, I want to, at the outset, thank the courageous leadership and commitment in very difficult times of our Secretary. This year, we come again, and the battles continue. Indeed, they've been enhanced. What we have seen over the course of the summer and what we have seen over the course of this year with the war in Ukraine and the concomitant consequence globe with respect to inflation, with respect to scarcity of supply of goods, with respect simply to hardship. Access to food continues regrettably to be the environment within which we live. I had hoped that there comes a time when we, as was said, when others before us, when I was a student, sought to fight the great famine in Africa and came together as one world to make that definable difference. Last year, I asked us to do the same. And maybe it is, in the words of Jimmy Cliff, that we have to keep trying and trying and trying, but the world must stand up. If our citizens, I say so today, because it is easy to come only and complain. But the truth is that it is within our power. We want to stand for peace, and whether we want to stand for prosperity. knowing that we choose to do so at the most difficult time and from the most difficult and deep place that we can do so in a very, very long time. It's possible. But it is up to us to change possibilities into realities. And what do I mean? Mr. President, we have been speaking for a long time about the reform of this institution. When this institution was formed. Earlier this week, President Biden spoke of the need to reform the Security Council. We call and echo for that. But we go further because we believe that a Security Council that retains war, as we have seen this year. And therefore, the reform must not simply be in its composition, but also be in the removal of that veto. We also believe that the recognition of the G7 countries must recognize that no longer can we accept that persons call year after year after year for the inclusion of the people of Africa and African descent to be included in the G7 and G20. For how can a world have at its core a subcommittee that excludes more than 1.4, 1.5 billion people of the world and expect it to reflect fairness and transparency in its decision making? We ask that the determination be made by those countries must embrace a transparent framework that allows our people who are losing faith in their institutions and in the governance of this world to understand that fairness means something. That fairness means the ability for all to have a voice. And that state, but it will only mean something when it also is reflected in our international community. And if I perhaps have one simple theme today, it is that fairness and that togetherness these are hard realities that simply require decisions. And that is why I use that language from that great anthem, We Are the World. That there comes when the world must come together as one. Yes, regrettably, there are too many people dying in conflict as a result of the economic crisis. And the hand that we must lend to life comes in the decisions that we must make to reform and to fight for peace. Fight for reform so that our citizens are not climate of pandemic and indeed now of the conflict that is leading to the inflationary pressures that leads regrettably to people taking circumstances into their own hand, as we have seen in Haiti in the last week. Any attempt to increase fuel prices any part of the world by 150% would have been met with great consternation and anger by population. Has been trying for almost 230 years to find stability of exploitation that it has faced. We ask ourselves, to what end will the world stand up and be counted for the people of Haiti? Similarly, we ask for the same transparency to occur with respect to the removal of the blockade against the people of Cuba. This is the 30th year that the resolution has called for that removal of that blockade. But it has been there for 60 years. And I say simply to the people of the United States and prosperity is the province of all. And yes, there may be problems on both sides, but there is nothing that justifies further hardship to people because of ideological differences. And if there are human rights differences, let us resolve them, as we have chosen to do with mightier countries across the world without the imposition of sanctions. Fairness and transparency demand it of us. But I also want to talk to you about other solutions that we believe can alter our condition without imposing burdens of taxation, unreasonably disparity in income is too great. And we live in a world where some are even benefiting from the crises disproportionately and egregiously. And we must ask ourselves, therefore, whether the time has not come for a review of the settlement of the Bretton Woods institutions that no longer serve the purpose in the 21st century that they served in the 20th century, that they served when they were catering to a quarter of the nation states that are now members of this. Ask ourselves whether the time has not come for active institutions. And why do I say so? The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development is really what the World Bank is. And maybe if we referred to that continuously, we would remind ourselves that the purpose of reconstruction and development must be appropriate to the century in which we live. And the century in which we live does not only demand of us the eradication of poverty, which remains a noble goal, but it demands of us equally the protection of global public goods. All of us in here have suffered for the protection of public health. All of us in here now know what it is to be on the front line of the climate crisis. Years ago, we spoke about small island developing states on the front line because we were the canaries in the mine. Today, we speak of all countries. And this hot, hot summer, with wildfires from California, to heat waves in North America and Europe, to waterways in Europe being prohibited from the ability of vessels to traverse it, to floods in China, and above all else, the apocalyptic floods in Pakistan, for which our heart goes. And any attempt to deny that the climate crisis has man-made origins is an attempt to delude ourselves and to admit that we want to be accomplices in the continued death and loss and damage that ensues to the people who are the victims of it. Our people demand better of us. We believe today that the most appropriate place to deal with global public goods is in fact the World Bank Group. But I want to simply say that if companies, multinational companies, have contributed to the global public risk or benefit to their resolution through a percentage, a small percentage of their profits, funding the needs of countries, whether it is in the issue of climate stability and resilience, and the protection of biodiversity, both on land and in our waters, whether it is for the protection of public health against the next pandemic, the slow motion pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, or others that we have not even contemplated. or the provision of education for each of our citizens to life imprisonment from a young age, or access to electricity as 600 million people in Africa do without it, or the equivalent is access to broadband. And of course, as I said to Congress last week, believe it or not, the right to a bank account, because countries across the world are being denied the right to access correspondent banking and leaving their citizens and their economies to function as financial pariahs. Hence, the provision of that fund to promote public goods at a global level is critical if we are to make a difference going forward and to achieve the peace, the love, and the prosperity to which I referred. I want to commend the International Monetary Fund for their rapid financing mechanism at the beginning of the pandemic crisis. That is the first recognition that middle-income countries should be able to access funding that for those who commend it to the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, do not simply commend it for countries following a disaster, but let us do it for countries before the disaster. For every dollar spent, as they have researched, saves $7 in avoided expenditure, not to mention the lives that are saved. We don't want only to pay the undertaker, we want to save lives. But I ask that resilience and sustainability trust may need that will depend on more countries seeding that fund with capital and rights to be used there, just as we ask them to allow those special drawing rights to be used to allow multilateral development banks to significantly increase the money that is available to countries, particularly at this time as we are on the verge of a debt crisis, where more than 45 countries are facing the heat of the moment because of the increased cost of capital as a result of the monetary policies that are being put in place to fight the We want to help us continue for the financing of sustainable development goals. And we link those goals to the global public goods. Why? Because they're fundamentally the right to development. They're fundamentally the right to give each person the ability to live a good life. And we can't be lost in the conflict and lost in the climate crisis and lost in the pandemic and forget fundamentally what our mission is. It's to be at least 30-year money. The world recognized that when it allowed Britain to be able to participate in the refinancing of its World War bonds, which were only paid off 8 years ago, one started. Or when it allowed Germany to cap its debt service at the equivalent of 5% of its exports, conscious that the cataclysmic while repaying debts incurred for war. My friends, we are no different today. We have incurred debts for COVID. We have incurred debts for climate. And we have incurred debts now in order to fight this difficult moment with the inflationary crisis and with the absence of certainty of supply of goods. Why, therefore, must the developing world money within 7 to 10 years when others had the benefit of longer tenors to repay. And to suggest to you that all of these things have been discussed, a large number of persons from civil society and academia at the beginning of August, end of July. And we settled on what we have come to call the Bridgetown Agenda, because we believe it to be a Bridgetown agenda for peace, a Bridgetown agenda for prosperity, a Bridgetown agenda inspired by love of humanity. And it is and will ask countries and people to join it, because we believe that unless we take responsibility for ourselves, unless we accept that we are the world, we're not going to see a change. And as I come to simply this issue of climate, which will dominate us over the next 45, 48 days as we go, that the trust that is needed to propel us to fight the great causes of our time will not the small island developing states came to Paris and agreed for it, that allowed us to do so was a promise of loss and damage. Today, the people of Guadeloupe and Puerto Rico, yesterday Turks and Caicos, and little do we know what will happen with Bermuda, face the difficulty of disruption by Hurricane Fiona. Today, this morning, I received news about difficulties for our own natural gas facilities, the installations for access to natural gas. This comes at a time when access to that commodity has already been affected by the war in Ukraine and the decision by Russia to cease supply to Europe. When we match this with the reality that we have not planned in granular form how we will have the capacity to meet then I see trouble ahead of us, and we must pause and get it right. Our small states are making commitments that the world wants to hear. But when those commitments are undermined by the inability to supply the electric cars or the batteries necessary to sustain renewable energy, then we know we have a problem. And that is why natural gas has been viewed as a bridge to clean energy. But when the countries in the own have determined that we cannot abandon access to our own natural gas resources until we are assured that we have the capacity to sustain our populations. This is where the rubber meets the ground. And I ask us today to recognize that those commitments on loss and damage and that granular detail that matches commitment to capacity that our world needs to be saved. My friends, I want to salute Denmark for its commitment on Tuesday to be able to propose $13 million to a loss and damage fund, for it represents the first acknowledgement by a North Atlantic country that demand for this loss and damage claim. And I ask us to recommit ourselves in the big matters. Don't explain and have the mature conversations rather than to rely on the headlines and the sound bites. We will find a disconnect between those who are governed and those who are governing. And therefore, let us to the task move with dispatch, not for sound bites, but for difficult conversations to secure the peace of this world, to secure the prosperity of our people, and to underpin it with a love for humanity nation was formed to do. And in the words all, and we can't pretend day by day that some change. This is our family, this is our world, and this is our time to make that defining difference. And many of the things that I've put before us today don't require money, but they require a commitment, and they require political will. And with the power of the pen, we can impose natural disaster and pandemic clauses in our debt. With the power of the pen, we can change the capital that is available to multilateral development banks that will with in today's world. And let us do so recognizing that a world that reflects an imperialistic order and hypocrisy and lack of transparency will not achieve that mission. And a level playing field will make that definable difference. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister, Minister for National Security and the Public Service, and I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. We have heard the last speaker for this meeting. The 9th plenary meeting to continue with the general debate will begin at 3 p.m. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. We didn't break it.